The darkness does not feel empty, it feels loaded. A narrow passage rises through the core of the Great Pyramid, and then, almost without warning, the ceiling seems to vanish upward. The stone walls lean inward in successive courses, each layer projecting slightly beyond the one below, until the space becomes less like a corridor and more like a shaft laid on its side. Ahead, the floor climbs at a steady angle into blackness. Behind, the lower passage narrows toward the point where this ascent began. Above, millions of tons of masonry press down through the pyramid's body. Yet here, deep inside that weight, stands one of the tallest enclosed spaces in any surviving monument of the Old Kingdom. This is the Grand Gallery. It is roughly 47 meters long, more than 8 meters high, and inclined at approximately the same steep angle as the ascending passage beneath it. Its lower width is little more than 2 meters, but the corbelled walls step inward as they rise, reducing the upper span to about half that distance. Along both sides run elevated stone benches, often called ramps, separated by a central trench. Cut into these side structures are regularly spaced openings and recesses, mirrored from one side to the other. Higher up, grooves extend along the walls. At the top, the gallery narrows toward the antechamber and the king's chamber beyond. Every surface appears to be doing something. The trouble is that no one can say with certainty what. The Grand Gallery has been entered, measured, drawn, photographed, scanned, and debated for centuries. Its dimensions are known with extraordinary precision. Engineers can model the forces around it. Archaeologists can compare its masonry with other pyramid interiors. Modern instruments can search beyond its visible walls for changes in density and concealed voids. Yet the more closely this space is examined, the less satisfactory any single explanation begins to feel. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, then imagine continuing upward. The climb is awkward. The angle is close to 26 degrees, steep enough that the body constantly feels the pull of the descent behind it. The central floor is not a broad, comfortable walkway. The benches on either side constrain the space, and the towering walls exaggerate every movement. In torchlight, the corbelled courses would emerge in bands, one above another, their upper edges fading into smoke and shadow. A voice would return from the stone altered and multiplied. Footsteps would travel through the gallery, then seem to come back from somewhere above. This experience matters because the Grand Gallery is often reduced to a diagram, a long inclined rectangle inside a triangular mass. But diagrams conceal its strangeness. It is disproportionately large compared with the passages that feed into it. The descending and ascending passages are cramped enough to force controlled movement. The gallery suddenly releases that compression vertically while keeping the route narrow. The result is architectural drama, whether that drama served ritual, engineering, construction, or several purposes at different times. The stone offers no explanatory inscription. There is no surviving text saying that ropes once ran through the grooves, that wooden beams fitted into the sockets, that granite blocks waited on the ramps, or that a royal procession moved beneath the rising ceiling. No painted scene shows workmen operating a mechanism here. No papyrus describes the gallery's use. What survives is architecture without instructions. That absence has encouraged certainty where certainty is not justified. Some accounts describe the gallery as a storage place for granite plugs later released to seal the ascending passage. Others present it as a lifting machine, a counterweight track, a ceremonial route for the dead king, or a structural device for redirecting pressure. Several ideas explain one feature elegantly. None explains every feature without leaving difficult questions behind. If granite plugs were stored here, why does the gallery require such extraordinary height? How were blocks weighing several tons restrained on a polished slope and then released in a controlled manner? Why are there so many symmetrical sockets when only a small number of plugs survive below if the space held machinery? Where are the unambiguous marks of heavy ropes, repeated hauling, anchor frames, or replaceable wooden fittings? If its purpose was mainly ceremonial, why does so much of its geometry resemble a technical installation? If the corbelled form was structural, why was this arrangement chosen when Egyptian builders knew other ways to protect passages? The evidence remains incomplete, but the contradictions are real. Even the gallery's relationship to the surrounding pyramid has become more mysterious. In 2017, muon detectors identified a large, previously unknown void above it. The signal was observed by independent detection systems, making the existence of a substantial low-density space difficult to dismiss. It extends for at least 30 meters, but its shape and purpose remain uncertain. It may be a single chamber, a sequence of spaces, a construction gap, or a structural feature designed to alter how weight is carried. It may relate directly to the Grand Gallery, or merely occupy the same region for reasons not yet understood. The discovery did not solve the gallery. It made the interior architecture harder to simplify. The temptation is to imagine the pyramid as a finished object conceived all at once, an immense geometric shell containing a few planned chambers. Yet during construction, it was a changing work site. Courses of limestone rose around temporary routes. Blocks arrived in sequences. Passages that later became sealed may once have been crowded with tools, sledges, ropes, survey lines, lamps, and workers coordinating tasks that had to succeed in the correct order. A space that appears ceremonial in the completed pyramid may have served a practical role while the structure was growing. A construction feature may later have been refined, sealed, and absorbed into the king's funerary architecture. This matters because the Grand Gallery seems caught between two identities. It is too monumental to feel like an ordinary service corridor, yet too mechanically detailed to behave like a purely symbolic passage. Its height creates grandeur, but also clearance. Its slope creates difficulty, but also a potential track. Its side ramps organize movement, but also offer surfaces for anchoring equipment. Its sockets repeat like elements of a system, though the system itself has vanished. At the upper end, the space contracts again. The soaring roof gives way to a lower passage, then to the antechamber with its grooves and granite barriers, and finally to the king's chamber, where enormous granite blocks form walls, floor and ceiling. The gallery therefore stands between the outer world and the most protected room in the pyramid, but also between limestone architecture and some of the heaviest granite elements carried high into the monument. That position may be meaningful in more than one way. For now, the only honest conclusion is that the Grand Gallery is not mysterious because it is unknown. It is mysterious because it is known in such detail. Every measurement sharpens the problem. Every socket demands a missing object. Every groove suggests motion without revealing what moved. Every corbelled course demonstrates control over stone while withholding the purpose of that control. The corridor rises, the walls close inward, and the ceiling remains suspended above the climber like a stone memory of an action no one witnessed. Somewhere in its geometry lies the logic of the builders, whether that logic belonged to ritual, mechanics, structure, security, or a sequence combining them. The gallery still refuses to yield a final answer, and before that answer can be approached, the world capable of building such a space must first be reconstructed. That world begins not with the pyramid as a lonely shape in the desert, but with a river, a court, and a state learning how to turn belief into stone. In the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, Egypt is already ancient by ordinary standards. Kings have ruled a unified land for centuries. Writing is established. Taxation, surveying, quarrying, transport, and large-scale labour are not experimental ideas. They are instruments of government. The Nile binds the country together, carrying grain, officials, stone, timber, and messages between settlements stretched along its banks. Each year, the flood reshapes fields and calendars alike. Agricultural production rises and falls with the river, and the state measures both land and obligation with increasing precision. Khufu inherits this organized world during the 4th dynasty, probably in the 26th century BCE. He does not invent monumental building. His father, Sneferu, has already presided over one of the most ambitious architectural programs in Egyptian history. At Meidum and Dashur, pyramid construction passes through a sequence of bold experiments. The bent pyramid changes angle partway upward, perhaps because of structural concerns or because the original plan proved too demanding. The red pyramid reaches a more stable form and becomes the earliest successful large true pyramid known. These are not isolated monuments. They are evidence of a generation learning through stone at an enormous scale. Khufu's builders therefore begin with experience but not with a finished formula. The Great Pyramid rises from a tradition of royal tombs that has been growing steadily more complex. Earlier mastabas are low rectangular structures built over burial chambers. Step pyramids transform stacked mastaba-like forms into monumental stairways. True pyramids smooth those steps into a continuous slope, creating a shape that is geometrically simple from a distance, but brutally demanding in execution. Each improvement requires more than artistic confidence. It requires command over foundations, angles, materials, workforces, transport, and time. Royal ideology gives these demands their purpose. The king is not merely a political ruler awaiting burial. He occupies a sacred position within the order of the world. His death is understood as a transformation, and the pyramid complex becomes a machine of continuity in the broadest religious sense. Temples, causeways, offering places, subsidiary structures, and burial chambers work together to sustain royal identity after death. The pyramid itself may evoke the primeval mound rising from the waters of creation, the descending rays of the sun, or the stairway by which the king joins the imperishable stars. Scholars still debate how these meanings developed and overlapped, but the monument clearly belongs to a religious system in which architecture preserves cosmic and political order. This is why the Great Pyramid cannot be understood as a pile of blocks arranged around a room. It is part of a planned landscape on the Giza Plateau, quarries, harbours, roads, workshops, bakeries, administrative spaces, workers' settlements, temples, and cemeteries form an extended construction environment. The pyramid is the most visible product of that environment, but it depends on everything around it. The people who build it are not well described by the old image of endless enslaved masses driven beneath the whip. Egypt certainly knows forms of forced labour and social inequality, and participation in state projects is not necessarily voluntary in the modern sense. Yet archaeological evidence points toward a highly organised workforce supported with food, shelter, tools, and medical care. Crews are divided into teams and smaller groups. Some work seasonally, perhaps when the Nile flood limits agricultural labour. Others are skilled specialists employed for longer periods: quarrymen, stone dressers, haulers, carpenters, rope makers, metal workers, surveyors, scribes, cooks, brewers, and administrators. Marks left inside, relieving spaces above the king's chamber, preserve names of work gangs associated with Khufu. These painted inscriptions were never intended for visitors. They are practical traces left by the people moving and positioning stone. Their survival reveals something easily lost beneath the monument's scale. The pyramid is not built by an anonymous force. It is built by organized human groups with identities, rivalries, supervisors, schedules, and obligations. Their tools are simple in appearance but effective in trained hands. Copper implements cut softer stone and work wood. Hard stone pounders break and shape limestone and granite. Sand serves as an abrasive. Wooden sledges move blocks across prepared surfaces, and wetting the ground can reduce friction. Boats carry materials along the Nile and through canals closer to the plateau. The limestone core comes largely from local quarries, while fine white casing stone is transported from Tura. Granite for the king's chamber and other internal elements travels from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers to the south. The arrival of those granite blocks is one of the practical realities that hangs over the mystery of the Grand Gallery. Some weigh many tens of tons. They must be quarried, shaped, loaded onto vessels, carried north, unloaded, dragged across the site, and raised into a monument whose height increases with every course. The exact lifting systems used remain uncertain. Straight external ramps, zigzag ramps, spiral arrangements, levering methods, and combinations of these have all been proposed. No single reconstruction has won universal acceptance because each faces different problems of space, material, slope, turning radius, and access. What survives in the record suggests not one miraculous technique, but a flexible building culture capable of using different methods at different stages. Low courses could be approached differently from upper levels. Smaller limestone blocks did not present the same challenges as large granite beams. Temporary structures may have been removed completely. Construction routes may have been absorbed into the finished monument. The absence of a complete ramp system today is therefore not surprising, but it leaves room for competing models. Precision adds another layer to the achievement. The base of the Great Pyramid is extraordinarily level. Its sides are aligned closely with the cardinal directions. The corners form a square with remarkable consistency over a vast area. Such accuracy requires repeated observation, measurement, and correction. The builders possess no modern surveying instruments, but they understand plumb lines, sighting methods, levels, right angles, and practical geometry. They work within a tradition where knowledge is transmitted through apprenticeship and administration, rather than preserved in technical manuals for future archaeologists. This missing documentation shapes nearly every modern debate. No surviving construction blueprint explains the internal passages. No engineering treatise records why one roof is corbelled and another flat. No project ledger lists the temporary equipment installed inside the Grand Gallery. The builders leave behind the finished geometry, but not the chain of decisions that produced it. Those decisions may not have remained fixed throughout construction. The internal plan of the Great Pyramid includes a subterranean chamber cut into the bedrock. The chamber traditionally called the Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, multiple passage systems, narrow shafts, and the Grand Gallery connecting key levels. Some scholars have proposed that the plan changed as work advanced, perhaps because burial arrangements were reconsidered, or because structural and ceremonial ambitions expanded. Others argue that the major elements belong to an integrated design from early in the project. The evidence does not permit complete certainty. Yet change would not imply confusion. Large projects evolve, new needs emerge. A route created for construction can acquire ritual importance. A chamber can be altered, abandoned, or reassigned. A technical solution can be transformed into monumental architecture. The builders of Khufu's pyramid are not following a timeless template. They are working at the outer edge of what Egyptian stone construction has yet attempted. That edge is visible in the interior. The king's chamber contains granite on a scale unmatched in earlier pyramids. Above it, successive spaces capped with massive beams help manage the weight overhead. The gallery below is equally unprecedented. Nothing in the surviving pyramid tradition offers a perfect earlier version of it. Its corbelled height, slope, side benches, central channel, grooves, and regular sockets appear in a monument already pushing architecture beyond familiar limits. The Grand Gallery is therefore born from a culture that joins theology to administration and symbolism to logistics. Its designers understand that royal eternity depends on very earthly materials, grain rations, copper tools, timber frames, rope fibers, river transport, measured angles, and human coordination. They can create a passage that feels ceremonial because they can also solve difficult structural problems. They can conceal practical systems inside sacred architecture because, in their world, construction and religion are not separate realms. By the time the pyramid reaches its completed form, its casing gleams above the plateau, its chambers are sealed within an ordered mountain of stone, and the temporary world that built it begins to disappear. Ramps are dismantled, work areas are abandoned or reused, wooden installations decay, ropes vanish. Knowledge once held by living crews becomes unnecessary to those who inherit only the finished monument. The pyramid survives. The instructions do not. Once the builders leave, the pyramid begins a second life, one defined not by construction, but by intrusion. The polished casing still covers most of the monument. The original entrance on the north face is concealed high above the ground, its carefully fitted stones offering little indication that a passage lies behind them. Inside, the routes toward the upper chambers are blocked. Granite plugs seal the lower end of the ascending passage. The king's chamber sits deep within the masonry, connected to the outer world by a sequence of spaces designed to resist casual access. Whatever temporary machinery may once have occupied the Grand Gallery has been removed, dismantled, or sealed away. The corridor is left empty, except for the architectural features that once supported an unknown purpose. It does not remain undisturbed forever. The precise history of the first intrusion is lost. The Great Pyramid was almost certainly entered in antiquity, perhaps more than once. By the time reliable historical descriptions begin to accumulate, the royal burial equipment has vanished. No complete funerary assemblage remains in the king's chamber. The granite sarcophagus is empty and damaged. Whether the pyramid was robbed soon after Khufu's burial, during later periods of political disorder, or through repeated incursions over centuries cannot be established with confidence. Ancient tomb robbers did not need to understand the entire design. They needed information. Workers, guards, priests, or later officials may have known the locations of hidden passages. Knowledge of the internal plan could survive locally long after the royal funeral. The pyramid's defences were formidable against uncertainty, but much less effective against someone who knew where to cut. A rough tunnel near the lower end of the Grand Gallery provides one of the strongest clues. It bypasses the granite plugs blocking the ascending passage by cutting through softer limestone around them. This route, now often called the well shaft connection, or robber's passage in discussions of the interior suggest that ancient intruders understood where the blocked passage continued. They did not attempt to smash directly through the granite. They went around it. That single act transformed the sealed architecture into an accessible network. Later visitors could enter through a forced passage on the north side, descend toward the original corridor, climb through the bypass around the plugs, and emerge into the upper system. At the end of that journey, the Grand Gallery would appear exactly as it still does, unexpectedly tall, steep, and empty. Yet emptiness is not the same as original condition. Anything made of timber, rope, leather, or fibre could have disappeared through decay, removal, reuse, or deliberate destruction. Even stone fittings may have been taken or broken. The medieval story most often associated with reopening the Great Pyramid names the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun, who ruled in the early 9th century. According to later traditions, his workers tried to locate the hidden entrance by cutting directly into the north face. They reportedly used fire, water, and metal tools to penetrate the masonry, eventually creating the rough tunnel now used by most modern visitors. The tale has become part of the pyramid's mythology, but its details should be treated cautiously. The surviving accounts were written after the supposed event and mix observation with legend. It is possible that al-Ma'mun sponsored an excavation into the monument. It is also possible that his workers enlarged or rediscovered an older opening rather than creating the entire tunnel themselves. The attribution remains traditional rather than certain. What matters physically is that the forced tunnel intersects the original descending passage close to the granite plugs. From there, access to the upper interior becomes possible through the ancient bypass. The route is not elegant. It ignores the intended entrance, violates the masonry, and reaches the pyramid's hidden spaces by accident or informed persistence. For many centuries afterward, this damaged pathway becomes the normal way inside. Medieval writers describe the pyramids with a mixture of curiosity, admiration, religious interpretation, and folklore. Some imagine treasure chambers filled with weapons, knowledge, or magical objects preserved before a great flood. Others regard the monuments as royal tombs or repositories built by legendary rulers. The Grand Gallery itself inspires descriptions of vast rising corridors and polished stone, but observation is often entangled with inherited stories. The interior is difficult to study, illumination depends on lamps and torches, air is poor, bats, dust, rubble, smoke, and debris obscure surfaces. Measurements made with ropes or simple rods vary. Visitors carve names into stone, remove fragments, and leave deposits behind. The pyramid becomes increasingly known, but not necessarily better understood. European travellers of the early modern period bring new habits of recording, though they also carry old expectations. Some search for biblical measurements. Others hope the pyramid preserves universal mathematical constants or lost knowledge from before recorded civilization. The interior is drawn repeatedly, but diagrams disagree over dimensions, angles, and the relationships among passages. The Grand Gallery occupies the centre of many of these plans because it is impossible to overlook. Its height makes it one of the easiest spaces to identify, yet its details are difficult to capture accurately. The side benches are sometimes drawn too wide. The central trench is simplified. The wall recesses become decorative marks rather than physical features. The corbelled roof appears symmetrical in sketches even where individual stones and joints complicate the pattern. By the 19th century, pyramid investigation becomes more systematic, though not always gentle. Explorers clear passages, remove debris, open blocked spaces, and search for chambers. Giovanni Battista Caviglia works inside the Great Pyramid in the early 1800s, clearing the lower passages and examining the well shaft. His efforts help reveal how the upper and lower systems connect, although the hazardous conditions and limited tools constrain what can be recorded. A few decades later, Howard Vyse uses far more aggressive methods. His team employs gunpowder to reach spaces above the king's chamber, exposing the series of relieving compartments now associated with the names of early explorers and the ancient work crews whose painted marks survive there. The discoveries are historically important, but the methods reflect an age when opening a monument often took priority over preserving it. These investigations also shift attention away from treasure. The pyramid begins to emerge as a construction problem. Scholars ask how the chambers were roofed, how pressure was controlled, and why passages follow their unusual routes. The Grand Gallery is no longer merely an impressive corridor leading to an empty chamber. It becomes evidence. William Matthew Flinders. Petrie changes the quality of that evidence in the 1880s. Working with instruments capable of much greater precision, he measures the Great Pyramid and the surrounding plateau systematically. His survey records the monument's base, orientation, casing remains, internal dimensions, and construction tolerances in far greater detail than most earlier attempts. Inside the Grand Gallery, measurement begins to strip away fantasy without removing mystery. The slope can be compared with the ascending passage. The spacing of the sockets can be recorded. The width between the side benches, the inward steps of the corbelled walls, and the alignment toward the king's chamber can be treated as parts of a deliberate design rather than visual curiosities. Petrie's work does not determine the gallery's function, but it defines the problem more accurately. Speculation can now be tested against stone. A proposed machine must fit the available width. A granite plug theory must account for real distances and gradients. A symbolic interpretation must coexist with architectural regularity too precise to dismiss as ornament. Modern documentation continues this process. Photography replaces hand sketches as the main visual record. Laser scanning and digital modeling capture surfaces in 3 dimensions. Material analysis distinguishes original stone from later deposits. Ultrasonic methods probe the interiors of blocks. Radar, electrical resistivity, and muon detection search beyond visible walls. Each method reveals a different kind of truth. A laser scan shows form but not intention. Muons reveal differences in density but not ritual meaning. Ultrasonic reflections may indicate joints or internal surfaces without explaining why the builders placed them there. Technology can discover what exists, yet purpose remains a historical question. This distinction becomes especially clear with the discovery of the large void above the Grand Gallery. The detection is not based on legend, hidden maps, or a damaged inscription. It comes from particles passing through the pyramid from the atmosphere, their paths altered by the amount of stone they cross. Multiple detector systems identify the same anomaly, confirming that a substantial low-density region exists. The result is among the most important discoveries inside the Great Pyramid in modern times, yet it does not reopen the monument in the manner of an ancient robber or a medieval tunneling crew. No doorway appears, no chamber is entered. The void remains physically beyond reach and conceptually undefined. The history of exploring the pyramid therefore follows a strange progression. People first break into it seeking the king and his wealth. Later visitors enter seeking prophecy, hidden wisdom, or mathematical perfection. Archaeologists arrive seeking measurements and construction history. Physicists eventually look through stone without touching it. Still, the Grand Gallery waits between discovery and explanation. Every generation sees it more clearly than the one before. none has recovered the missing instructions. Seeing the Grand Gallery clearly requires abandoning the comfortable simplicity of the word corridor. A corridor is usually a space between destinations, defined mainly by where it leads. The Grand Gallery refuses that secondary role. Its geometry is too elaborate, its proportions too deliberate, and its surfaces too carefully organized to be treated as an enlarged passage, accidentally placed between the ascending passage and the king's chamber. From the lower end, the first impression is vertical. The ascending passage arrives low and narrow, restricting the body, then opens into a chamber-like space whose roof rises more than 8 meters above the sloping floor. The transition is so sudden that the gallery seems to begin as an architectural release, yet the width at walking level remains constrained. The floor does not expand into a broad hall. Instead, the walls preserve a narrow route, while the space stretches upward. The gallery measures approximately 47 meters along its slope. Its incline closely follows that of the ascending passage, producing the effect of one continuous rising line through the pyramid. That continuity is central to mechanical interpretations. If a load moved along the lower passage, it could theoretically continue into the gallery without encountering a major change in gradient. At the same time, the uninterrupted ascent creates a powerful symbolic route, drawing movement steadily toward the level of the king's chamber. The floor is divided into 3 long elements. A central trench runs up the gallery, flanked by raised stone benches commonly described as side ramps. The trench is only wide enough for controlled movement. Its depth and proportions vary slightly because of wear, damage, and repairs, but the basic arrangement is unmistakable. The benches rise on both sides like narrow platforms, creating a cross-section unlike any ordinary ceremonial hallway. These side structures are among the gallery's most debated features. Their upper surfaces may have supported people, equipment, blocks, or wooden installations. They could have served as guideways alongside the central channel, or as stable bases for frames spanning the passage. In a purely ritual interpretation, they might have shaped the procession and emphasized the central route. Yet their repeated openings suggest that they once did more than define space visually. At regular intervals, rectangular sockets interrupt the benches. There are 28 known positions on each side, arranged in mirrored pairs, although surviving conditions are not identical at every point. Many consist of a cut opening associated with a recess in the wall above. Their spacing gives the gallery the appearance of a stripped mechanical structure, as though wooden uprights, beams, braces, or other removable fittings once occupied the empty places. No such fittings survive. That absence is frustrating but unsurprising. Wood was valuable in ancient Egypt, especially large structural timber. Any installation could have been removed intentionally after completing its task. It might have been reused elsewhere, burned, carried away by intruders, or lost through decay. The sockets therefore demonstrate that something may have been inserted, but not what that object was. Their regularity is strong evidence of planning. Their emptiness prevents a final reconstruction. Some openings show signs of alteration. Parts may have been enlarged, damaged, or reshaped during ancient intrusion and later exploration. This complicates attempts to determine their original dimensions. A socket that now seems capable of holding a substantial post may once have been narrower. A recess interpreted as an anchor point may have lost an edge. The visible stone is ancient, but it has not passed through 45 centuries untouched. Above the benches, long grooves extend along the gallery walls. Their relationship to the lower sockets has encouraged proposals involving continuous wooden frameworks. Uprights could have risen from the bench openings and connected to longitudinal beams placed within the grooves. Such an arrangement might have formed a guide system, restrained moving weights, supported a temporary floor, or carried ropes and rollers. The geometry makes these ideas possible. It does not make any one of them certain. The walls then begin their inward climb. 7 corbelled courses rise above the lower vertical faces, each course projecting inward by several centimetres. The result is a roof much narrower than the space below. Rather than spanning the full width with a single large slab, the builders gradually reduce the distance that the uppermost ceiling stones must bridge. This is an old architectural principle, but its execution here is monumental. The walls appear to close over the passage in slow motion, course after course, until the final roof slabs complete the enclosure. Corbelling can reduce the unsupported span, but calling the gallery a structural solution does not explain why the solution takes this exact form. Its enormous height is not automatically required merely to roof a narrow corridor. The corbelled profile may help direct pressure outward into surrounding masonry, yet the distribution of forces around an inclined void inside a pyramid is complex. Later discoveries above the gallery have made simple explanations even less secure. If the Big Void is connected to the gallery's structural system, the visible corbelling may represent only the lower part of a much larger arrangement. The stone surfaces themselves preserve another contradiction. Some areas are finely finished, with carefully aligned courses and smooth faces. Others reveal roughness, damage, missing sections, and later deposits. Early accounts sometimes described the interior as almost impossibly polished, but close inspection shows variation. This matters because marks interpreted as wear from ropes, sledges, or machinery may instead result from quarrying, dressing, human passage, mineral deposits, smoke, restoration, or later disturbance. Material studies increasingly show why visual judgment alone is unreliable. A darkened patch may not be an ancient lubricant stain. A smoothed edge may not record repeated mechanical contact. A line that resembles abrasion may follow the natural structure of the stone. The gallery has accumulated thousands of years of alteration, and separating original construction traces from later change requires more than an evocative photograph. At the lower end, the architecture becomes especially complicated. The gallery meets the ascending passage near the opening to a horizontal route leading toward the so-called Queen's Chamber. A shaft also descends from this region through the pyramid's interior toward the lower passages. These junctions create a kind of architectural crossroads. Movement can continue upward, branch horizontally, or descend through a rougher and more irregular route. The floor near this transition does not behave like a simple ceremonial threshold. It accommodates changing levels and intersecting passages. Any theory proposing that large objects moved through the gallery must explain how they passed this lower junction. Any theory involving a continuous track must reconstruct missing flooring or bridging elements. Any security model must account for how the space was accessed before final sealing. The upper end is equally demanding. The Grand Gallery terminates at a raised step sometimes called the Great Step, beyond which a low horizontal passage leads toward the antechamber. The change is dramatic. After the long ascent beneath the towering corbelled roof, movement is compressed again. A person must approach a much lower opening, leaving the vertical grandeur behind. For mechanical theories, this upper transition may mark the location where forces change direction. Ropes could have passed toward a guiding structure in or near the antechamber. Loads might have stopped, been transferred, or operated equipment beyond the visible route. For security theories, the step could have helped position or control blocking stones. For ritual interpretations, it creates a carefully staged progression from rising openness into confinement before entry into the king's chamber. The antechamber itself contains vertical grooves and granite elements that look undeniably functional. They formed part of a barrier system separating the gallery from the royal chamber. Yet even here, the original sequence of operation is debated. The surviving stones do not preserve a complete mechanism, and damage obscures how movable barriers were controlled. The Grand Gallery's upper end therefore connects not to an answer, but to another incomplete installation. Precision binds all these features together. The gallery is not a random cavity carved after the pyramid was built. Its slope, corbelled courses, side benches, sockets, grooves, and upper and lower transitions belong to a coordinated design. Small irregularities exist, as they do throughout ancient construction, but the overall system is too orderly to be accidental. The lesser-known surprise is how much of the mystery depends not on grand dimensions, but on repeated small voids. The towering roof captures attention, yet the sockets may be more informative. Each one once received something, avoided something, or marked a required interval. Repetition implies procedure. Procedure implies equipment, sequence, or ritual order. But without the missing components, repetition becomes a language with its nouns erased. The Grand Gallery can therefore be measured down to individual stones while remaining functionally incomplete. Its anatomy is visible, its former body is gone. The missing body of the gallery may be gone, but the stone around it is still carrying a load that would crush an ordinary room. The Great Pyramid is not hollow in the modern sense. Its chambers and passages occupy only a minute fraction of the total mass. Around the Grand Gallery rise hundreds of courses of limestone, stacked into a monument that originally reached about 146 meters above the plateau. The gallery lies well below the summit, buried inside a vast compression field where gravity transfers weight downward through countless joints, blocks, and irregular contact surfaces. Yet the corridor has survived. Its endurance can create the impression that the builders solved the problem by making everything impossibly strong. The reality is more subtle. Stone is excellent under compression but poor under tension. A limestone block can support enormous weight when pressure travels through it evenly, but it can fracture when forces bend it, pull it apart, or concentrate around a flaw. Open a large cavity inside a mountain of masonry, and the load above must find new paths around the missing material. The shape of the Grand Gallery helps redirect those paths. Its corbelled walls step inward as they rise, reducing the width of the final roof span. Each projecting course transfers part of the load toward the sides, rather than allowing all pressure to bear directly on a broad horizontal ceiling. In principle, this arrangement creates a kind of stone funnel, moving forces outward into surrounding masonry. The upper slabs then bridge a relatively narrow gap. This does not mean the corbelling eliminates pressure. It changes where that pressure travels. The gallery is also inclined, which makes its structural behavior more complicated than that of a level chamber. Loads do not act on an isolated cross-section. They pass through masonry above, beside, and below the corridor along changing planes. Joints between blocks influence how stress is spread. Small voids, mortar gaps, natural fractures, and variations in stone quality can create local concentrations. The pyramid behaves less like a single carved mountain than like an enormous assembly of interacting pieces. Modern structural models can estimate these forces, but every model depends on assumptions. Researchers must decide how tightly adjacent blocks fit, how much friction exists at joints, whether hidden gaps are present, and how the core masonry was arranged beyond visible surfaces. Even the elastic properties of ancient limestone vary from block to block. The calculations can reveal plausible stress patterns, but they do not reproduce the monument with perfect certainty. What survives in the record suggests that the builders understood load through practice rather than formal equations. Generations of quarrying and monumental construction had taught them how stone fails. They knew that cracks often begin where spans are too broad, or pressure becomes uneven. They had seen the consequences of ambitious design in earlier pyramids. They could respond by changing angles, increasing support, staggering joints, and redirecting weight through carefully shaped spaces. The Great Pyramid displays several different roofing strategies. The so-called Queen's Chamber uses large gabled limestone blocks forming a pointed roof. The King's Chamber has a flat granite ceiling, but above it rise a series of additional compartments capped by massive beams and a final gabled arrangement. The Grand Gallery uses corbelling. These are not repeated versions of one universal solution. They are responses tailored to different rooms, materials, elevations, and architectural demands. The variety matters because it prevents a simple claim that the gallery had to be tall solely for structural reasons. Egyptian builders knew how to protect a chamber without creating an 8-meter-high corbelled corridor. If structural stability were the only concern, a smaller void might have been easier to support. The gallery's dimensions therefore appear to reflect another requirement: mechanical clearance, ceremonial scale, construction access, or some combination, while the corbelled form helped make that requirement structurally possible. The surrounding masonry may have been arranged with more care than the pyramid's rough core suggests from a distance. Blocks near passages and chambers are often fitted differently from ordinary fill zones. Larger stones can form protective envelopes. Joints may be staggered to avoid continuous weakness. Some internal spaces appear to be bordered by masonry organized around their geometry, rather than simply interrupted by it. Still, much of this arrangement remains hidden. Only the exposed faces inside the passages can be inspected directly. The deeper structure must be inferred from scans, damaged areas, and comparisons with other parts of the monument. No single explanation fully accounts for how every load-bearing element around the Grand Gallery was intended to function. The discovery of the Big Void makes the problem even more intriguing. A substantial low-density region lies above the gallery, extending for at least 30 meters. If this void is roughly aligned with the corridor below, it may alter the load path in a significant way. Instead of a solid mass pressing directly downward, there may be a second open or loosely filled zone interrupting the masonry. This could reduce weight over part of the gallery, redirect forces toward its sides, or reflect a construction system that created spaces unintentionally or temporarily. But the shape remains uncertain. A long void could be horizontal, inclined, segmented, or composed of several adjacent spaces. Its cross-section is not known precisely enough to determine how it interacts with the gallery. Calling it a relieving chamber may sound reasonable, but the label quietly assumes the very function that must be demonstrated. It might indeed serve structural purposes. It could also be a construction corridor, an abandoned passage, a sequence of gaps, or a feature with multiple rolls. The gallery's survival through earthquakes has also encouraged speculation. The Giza Plateau has experienced seismic activity over thousands of years. The pyramid has lost casing stones, suffered local damage, and endured changes to its outer profile. Yet its main internal chambers remain standing. Recent study of the monument's vibration behavior show that the pyramid responds differently from the surrounding ground. influenced by its geometry, mass, foundation, and internal spaces. This is important for understanding long-term stability, but it does not prove that the Grand Gallery was deliberately designed as an earthquake protection system. Ancient builders certainly knew that structures could crack and settle, and they may have developed forms that performed well under dynamic forces. Still, attributing the gallery's exact geometry to seismic engineering goes beyond the available evidence. Resistance may be an outcome of robust construction rather than the original purpose of the space. A lesser-known aspect of the problem is that survival itself can mislead. Archaeologists naturally study what remains, but the surviving structure represents the successful parts of the design. Failed temporary elements have disappeared. Areas that cracked may have been repaired during construction. Blocks that proved unsuitable could have been replaced before the pyramid was finished. The gallery visible today is the final result of decisions and corrections that left little trace. Its walls are not perfectly untouched. Small displacements, missing edges, and damaged joints record later stress and human interference. Yet there is no evidence of catastrophic collapse along the main length. The corbelled system continues to hold, not as an abstract geometric principle, but through the accumulated contact of thousands of stones around it. The builders may also have benefited from the pyramid's broad distribution of weight. Pressure does not descend as a single vertical column. The sloping outer form spreads masonry over an enormous base. Much of the load travels downward and outward through the body of the monument. Internal spaces disrupt this flow locally, but they do not stand beneath the entire pyramid as isolated rooms beneath a tower. Even so, the Grand Gallery is positioned close to some of the monument's most demanding internal architecture. It rises toward the granite King's Chamber and the heavy roofing systems above it. Its upper end approaches a region where immense beams, barrier stones, and narrow passages converge. If the gallery served during construction, it existed not only beneath later masonry, but within an evolving network of loads that changed as each new course was added. At one stage, the gallery may have stood open to the sky or beneath only a shallow covering. Later, it became progressively enclosed. Temporary braces could have supported vulnerable areas. Workers may have monitored joints for movement. The corbelled courses could be built upward in sequence as surrounding masonry rose, allowing the corridor and pyramid core to stabilize together. By completion, the Grand Gallery had become both an interior void and an engineered boundary. It preserved empty space by persuading the weight above to pass around it. That achievement explains how the gallery survives, but not why such a difficult space was required in the first place. Structure can protect a purpose without revealing it. The corbelled walls show how the builders made the corridor possible. The next question lies in how they built it while the stone mountain was still climbing around them. While the stone mountain is still rising, the Grand Gallery is not yet a hidden interior. It is a construction zone suspended between open air and future darkness. This is one of the hardest facts to hold in mind when looking at the finished pyramid. Today, every wall appears permanent, every passage seems enclosed from the beginning, and each chamber feels as though it was carved into an already completed mass. In reality, the interior spaces are built course by course with the structure around them. The gallery exists first as a line marked into an unfinished platform, then as low walls, then as a deepening channel, and only later as the tall corbelled space now sealed beneath thousands of additional blocks. The sequence matters because function depends on access. A corridor buried beneath a completed pyramid can do very little. A corridor open from above during construction can serve workers, materials, surveyors, temporary platforms, lifting devices, and structural inspection. The same architecture may therefore have behaved very differently at different stages of the project. At the earliest phase, builders established the pyramid's base, orientation, and internal roots. The descending passage is cut partly into bedrock and partly constructed through masonry. The rising route toward the upper chambers must be fixed before the surrounding courses climb too high. Once the lower portion of the ascending passage is placed, the line of the grand gallery can continue upward at the same gradient. This continuity suggests planning, but it does not reveal whether the entire upper interior was fixed from the first day. Scholars still debate whether Khufu's pyramid reflects a single integrated design or a sequence of revisions. The subterranean chamber, the so-called Queen's Chamber, and the King's Chamber have sometimes been interpreted as successive burial plans, each replacing the last as the pyramid grew. Other researchers argue that the arrangement was intentional from the outset, with different chambers serving distinct roles. The surviving masonry cannot settle the issue completely. Changes made early enough could be absorbed so neatly into the construction that they leave little visible evidence. A passage abandoned while still open might be sealed and forgotten. A chamber initially planned for one purpose could be incorporated into a larger design. Large building projects do not need to be chaotic to evolve. Whatever the original plan, the gallery's lower structure had to be coordinated with the horizontal passage leading toward the Queen's Chamber. That junction creates a difficult three-dimensional problem. The builders are not simply stacking blocks around a straight tunnel. They are managing intersecting routes at different levels while preserving the intended slope and alignment of each. The central trench and side benches must also be created in sequence. Some elements may be structural parts of the permanent gallery floor. Others may reflect the need to support temporary installations. The raised benches could provide stable working surfaces above the central channel. Wooden planks might once have bridged gaps, creating a broader floor than the one visible today. Such a floor could later be removed, leaving the stone features beneath exposed. This possibility helps explain why the completed gallery feels impractical for ordinary movement. Builders during construction may not have climbed the same narrow surfaces used by modern visitors. Temporary walkways, ladders, railings, and platforms could have transformed the space. No traces of these arrangements need survive if they were made from timber and dismantled before sealing. As the gallery walls rise, the corbelled courses are added one by one. Each new layer projects inward, narrowing the span above. The surrounding core masonry must climb alongside them. If the builders raised the gallery walls too far above the adjacent pyramid courses, they would create unstable, exposed structures. If they buried the space too quickly, access for finishing and equipment would become difficult. The most practical sequence likely involved alternating between the interior architecture and the surrounding mass. This slow enclosure would produce a changing workplace. At first, sunlight might reach the lower courses directly. Later, the walls would cast deeper shadows while the top remained open. Workers could stand on temporary scaffolds spanning the gallery, dressing the stone faces, checking alignment, and placing the next corbelled course. As the roof neared completion, illumination and ventilation would diminish. Lamps would replace daylight. Smoke and dust would collect beneath the narrowing upper space. The final roof slabs present another logistical question. They must be positioned across the reduced upper span while the gallery remains accessible. Their placement may have required temporary platforms built within the space or approach routes from the surrounding construction level. Once set, the roof converts the rising channel into a sealed tunnel, although the masonry above may still be far from complete. The walls and ceiling could then be finished from inside. Yet the degree of finishing raises questions about timing. Some surfaces appear carefully dressed, while others retain irregularities. If machinery or heavy construction activity continued after the roof was installed, fine finishing might have been delayed to avoid damage. Conversely, if the gallery's technical role ended before enclosure, its surfaces could have been refined as part of a later ceremonial conversion. This sequence supports the possibility of multiple lives within one space. During the first life, the gallery may function as part of the building process. Its sockets could hold frames, braces, platforms, or guidance structures. Its central channel might accommodate movement or access. During the second life, removable equipment is taken away, walls are cleaned or finished, and the corridor becomes part of the permanent route toward the king's chamber. These uses need not be mutually exclusive. The transition between them would have been deliberate. Builders would remove what was no longer needed, inspect the stone, close temporary openings, and prepare the interior for sealing. Any wooden fittings valuable enough to reuse would be carried out. Rope would be reclaimed. Debris would be cleared. Features cut directly into the masonry would remain, stripped of the objects that made them intelligible. Some details may record this conversion. Empty sockets appear too regular to be accidental, yet many do not seem necessary for the gallery's final ceremonial appearance. Their survival makes sense if they belong to a temporary installation that was removed. At the same time, the corbelled walls and imposing height were preserved rather than filled in, suggesting that the open volume retained value after construction. The order in which the upper chambers were completed adds further complexity. The king's chamber contains granite blocks that had to reach their final positions before the pyramid enclosed them completely. The enormous beams above the chamber likewise required access from construction levels high in the rising monument. The grand gallery may have remained open and active while these elements were being installed, but the exact relationship between the two operations is unknown. A purely internal lifting system would require the gallery to be completed early enough to operate before the heaviest upper stones were placed. An external ramp model could allow the gallery to serve other purposes while granite arrived from outside at the appropriate elevation. Both possibilities demand careful scheduling. Neither is disproved simply because the final monument hides the routes used. Recent computational studies of pyramid construction emphasize this logistical character. A successful model must account not only for whether a block can be moved, but for how workers, ramps, supplies, and masonry courses interact over years. A route that works geometrically may fail if it blocks another task. A lifting method that handles one beam may be too slow for ordinary core stones. Construction is a sequence of overlapping systems, not one elegant trick repeated from base to summit. This may explain why no universal theory has prevailed. The builders probably did not rely on a single method. Low courses could be supplied directly from broad approaches. Higher levels might use narrower ramps, levering, temporary embankments, or mechanisms adapted to specific loads. The Grand Gallery, if involved, may have solved one limited problem rather than the entire pyramid. A lesser-known complication is that the builders also had to preserve survey control as the monument rose. The outer faces were not yet fully visible in finished form, and the interior routes could not be allowed to drift out of alignment. Vertical and horizontal references had to be transferred upward through active work zones. Open spaces near the gallery may have assisted measurement before being closed, though direct evidence remains scarce. Eventually, the final courses cover the roof. The gallery disappears from the construction surface. From outside, nothing reveals the vast inclined cavity below. Work continues upward until the summit is completed, and the casing stones form a smooth geometric shell. By then, the gallery has crossed a boundary. It is no longer part of a living work site. It has become sealed architecture. The sequence that created it is gone, but the stone preserves hints of temporary stages, repeated sockets, unfinished edges, transitions that look adapted rather than decorative, and a volume far larger than a simple passage requires. What survives suggests that the gallery cannot be understood only in its final state. Its purpose may lie partly in what it did while the pyramid was still incomplete. If the Grand Gallery belonged partly to the construction process, the most obvious burden moving through or near it was granite. The stone is unlike the pale limestone that forms most of the pyramid. It is darker, harder, denser, and far more difficult to shape. The granite used in the king's chamber and the spaces above it came from quarries at Aswan, far to the south. Before a single block could become part of Khufu's monument, it had to be separated from bedrock, dressed sufficiently for transport, moved to the Nile, loaded onto a vessel, carried downstream, brought ashore near Giza, and dragged across the plateau. Only then did the most difficult stage begin raising it into the growing pyramid. The king's chamber sits more than 40 meters above the monument's base. Its wall blocks weigh several tons, while some of the granite beams used in the chamber roof and the compartments above are far heavier. Estimates vary according to individual dimensions, but the largest reach into the range of many tens of tons. These were not isolated ceremonial objects that could be handled slowly after the rest of the building was finished. They had to arrive in the correct order while the surrounding courses remained accessible. The practical challenge invites a simple question. Could the Grand Gallery have helped move them? Its slope points directly toward the level of the king's chamber. The ascending passage and gallery form a continuous rising route. Their alignment appears almost designed to encourage the idea of transport. Place a sled on the incline, attach ropes, organize teams above or below, and the corridor begins to resemble a hauling way hidden inside the pyramid. Yet the apparent simplicity disappears as soon as a real block is introduced. The ascending passage is narrow and low. A massive granite beam could not travel through it in its final orientation. The surviving dimensions impose severe limits on the size of any load moving from the lower interior into the gallery. Some smaller blocks might fit, especially if shaped later, but the largest roofing beams plainly require another route. They were almost certainly brought to the necessary elevation from outside while the pyramid remained under construction. This weakens the idea that the gallery served as a tunnel through which all the king's chamber granite was hauled from ground level. It does not eliminate every construction role. The gallery may have assisted movement after certain blocks reached an intermediate height. It may have operated ropes connected to loads elsewhere. It may have raised smaller elements, managed equipment, or helped control stones approaching the upper chamber from a different direction. The distinction is important. A hauling system does not require the load itself to occupy the same space as the workers or counterweights operating it. Ropes could pass through the gallery while stones moved along an external ramp or construction platform. The corridor's height would provide clearance for long rope paths, suspended elements, guiding beams, or shifting angles of pull. The side sockets could support a framework that kept ropes separated and aligned. The central trench might accommodate moving weights or allow access beneath a temporary floor. Ancient Egyptian rope technology was capable of heavy work. Ropes were made from plant fibers, including materials such as papyrus, palm, flax, and grasses, depending on period and purpose. Thick ropes could be formed by twisting smaller strands together. Scenes from later tombs show teams hauling colossal statues on sledges, with workers pulling coordinated lines while liquid is applied ahead of the runners to reduce friction. The famous image of a large statue being dragged does not explain the Great Pyramid directly, but it demonstrates that Egyptian builders understood mass hauling as a managed system. The load rests on a sled. Ropes distribute force across many workers. Supervisors coordinate rhythm. The path is prepared. Friction is treated as an engineering problem rather than accepted as unavoidable. Granite on a slope creates greater danger. A heavy block that begins sliding backward can accelerate rapidly. Rope alone is not enough unless anchored securely and controlled through a system capable of absorbing sudden loads. Wooden chocks, crossbeams, stops, and multiple lines would be essential. The repeated sockets along the gallery could theoretically hold such restraint devices, allowing a load to be secured at intervals. This produces one possible interpretation of the side benches. A sled or guided platform could occupy the central space while timber frames rose from the sockets on both sides. Crosspieces might span the gallery, acting as brakes or anchoring points. Workers could advance the load in stages, securing it at one interval before resetting ropes for the next pull. The regular spacing supports a staged process. A heavy object does not need to be moved the entire length in one continuous effort. It can be raised a short distance, blocked in place, and then raised again. Repetition in the masonry may reflect repetition in the work, but the fit is imperfect. The central trench is narrow. A sled wide enough to carry major granite components would interact awkwardly with the raised benches. Some reconstructions require a wooden floor covering the trench and resting on the side structures, creating a broader inclined surface. Others imagine guide rails or runners installed above the permanent stone. None of these wooden components survives, and the stone does not preserve an unmistakable wear pattern, showing repeated passage of large sledges. The polished or smooth appearance of some surfaces has occasionally been presented as evidence of hauling, but this is uncertain. Finishing tools, later human traffic, cleaning, mineral deposition, and restoration can all alter stone. Genuine mechanical wear would need to show consistent direction, pressure points, and correspondence with a workable apparatus. The visible traces are not decisive. There is also the question of labour space. A team pulling from above would need room near the top of the gallery or beyond it. The passage into the antechamber is too low and restricted for a large group. Workers pulling from below could not easily raise a block without a secure redirection point above. A hauling theory therefore tends to require pulleys, rollers, beams, or rope guiding elements near the upper end. True compound pulleys are not securely documented for Egypt at the time of Khufu. This does not mean the builders lacked methods for redirecting force. A rope passing over a smooth beam, rounded stone, wooden roller, or lubricated surface can change direction without a later-style pulley wheel. Such devices may be described as pulley-like because they perform part of the same function, even if they lack a grooved rotating wheel. The antechamber becomes important here. Its granite grooves and confined geometry suggest movable barriers and carefully managed stone components. Some mechanical models place a force-changing apparatus in this region, allowing ropes from the gallery to act on loads elsewhere. The upper end of the gallery would then be less a doorway than a control point. Still, the evidence remains incomplete. No wooden roller survives. No rope groove can be identified with universal confidence. No anchor system has been found intact. The mechanical interpretation is built from architectural compatibility rather than direct recovery of equipment. An even larger problem is sequence. If the gallery was used to help raise granite for the king's chamber, it had to be available before those stones reached their final positions. The corridor would need sufficient enclosure to support its equipment. but enough external access would also have to remain open for the granite blocks themselves. The system must therefore fit into a narrow construction window. That window may have existed. The gallery's lower walls and sockets could be completed while the pyramid around them stood at an intermediate height. Granite blocks could arrive along external ramps to a platform near the chamber level. Ropes running through the gallery might then help pull, stabilize, or position them. Once the heavy stones were installed, the equipment could be dismantled, the gallery roof completed or refined, and further masonry added above. This hybrid model avoids forcing enormous granite beams through the ascending passage. It also reflects the likelihood that external and internal methods work together, yet it remains a reconstruction, not a witnessed procedure. The surprising detail is that raising a block may not have been the hardest moment. Positioning it precisely could be worse. A beam weighing dozens of tons cannot simply be dragged into a proximate place. It must be aligned, supported, lowered, and adjusted without damaging adjacent masonry. Temporary wooden cribbing, levers, sand beds, and carefully controlled rope tension may have mattered more than raw pulling power. The Grand Gallery, with its long incline and repeated anchoring points, could have provided controlled force rather than direct transport. It might have acted as a regulator, allowing workers to tighten, release, and redistribute tension while a load moved elsewhere. In that role, its architecture begins to resemble part of a machine whose working object lay beyond its walls. The granite survives in place. The ropes do not. The contrast defines the problem. The heaviest evidence remains, while the technology that moved it has vanished almost completely. And once ropes are introduced into the gallery, the idea of simple hauling gives way to a more ambitious possibility that the corridor itself once contained a moving weight designed to lift another. The counterweight idea begins with a reversal. Instead of imagining hundreds of workers dragging a stone upward by brute force, imagine a heavy mass descending under control and using gravity to pull another load in the opposite direction. The principle is simple. A descending weight can create tension in a rope. If that rope passes over a beam, roller, or smooth-turning surface, its direction changes. One mass moves down while another rises. The system does not eliminate the work required to move stone, because the counterweight must itself be loaded, raised, reset, or replaced. What it can do is concentrate effort, stabilize motion, and transform a difficult upward pull into a controlled exchange between two moving loads. The Grand Gallery seems almost designed to invite this possibility. It is long, steep, unusually high, and aligned with the ascending passage. Its central channel could accommodate a moving sled. Its side benches could support guides or working platforms. Its upper end approaches the antechamber, where granite grooves and constricted spaces suggest that heavy components were once controlled with precision. The entire route resembles a sloping track connected to a force-changing station. In the most detailed recent mechanical reconstruction, the Grand Gallery and the ascending passage form a continuous sliding ramp. A counterweight travels downward along this incline while ropes transmit its force upward and outward. Near the top, a pulley-like arrangement redirects the pull toward construction loads. The gallery's height provides clearance for ropes and framing. Its repeated architectural features serve as support points for a wooden installation later removed. This model is attractive because it attempts to explain several puzzles at once. The slope is no longer merely symbolic. The great height becomes working space. The central trench becomes a track. The grooves and recesses become traces of missing equipment. The antechamber becomes part of an operating mechanism rather than only a security barrier. Yet a plausible machine must do more than match the shape of a room. it must survive the physics of real stone. A counterweight heavy enough to assist with blocks weighing many tons would itself be dangerous. It could consist of a loaded sled, a wooden container filled with rubble, or a platform carrying stone. As it descended, friction against the ramp would reduce its effective pull. Too much friction and the system would stall. Too little and the weight could accelerate beyond control. The builders would need reliable braking, guiding, and anchoring at every stage. The gallery's slope creates both force and risk. At roughly 26 degrees, gravity pulls a significant fraction of the counterweight's mass down the incline. A sled weighing several tons could generate substantial rope tension, especially if its runners moved over prepared surfaces, but the system would also place enormous loads on every point where the rope changed direction. A wooden beam at the upper end might experience pressures capable of crushing fibres, splitting supports, or tearing an anchor from the masonry. Ancient builders could compensate by using multiple ropes, broad contact surfaces, and replaceable timber, rather than concentrating the full force on one small axle. They could pass ropes over large rounded beams or through a sequence of guiding elements. Thick wooden frames could distribute pressure into several sockets and wall recesses. Lubrication might reduce wear, though excessive lubrication would create its own problems in a system that depended on controlled friction. The mechanism need not resemble a modern crane. It may have been slower, heavier, and less efficient by modern standards while still being useful. A counterweight descending a few meters could raise or steady a construction load by a smaller distance. Workers could stop the system, secure both masses, reset ropes, and repeat the process. The operation might advance in short controlled stages rather than one dramatic lift. This stage movement fits the rhythm of pyramid construction. Large blocks do not need to travel quickly, they need to travel predictably. A method that raises a stone only a short distance per cycle can still be effective if it prevents uncontrolled sliding and reduces the number of workers required at the most dangerous point. Resetting the counterweight is the hidden cost. Once it reaches the bottom of the gallery or ascending passage, it must be returned uphill or unloaded. If the counterweight is a container filled with small stones, workers can remove the contents at the lower end, carry them upward in manageable amounts, and refill the container near the top. This converts one immense lifting problem into many smaller transport tasks. Gravity then performs the controlled descent again. Such a system would be labour-intensive, but the pyramid project already commands a large organised workforce. Efficiency does not mean minimising all human effort. It means using available labour in a way that avoids impossible concentrations of force. The ascending passage may extend the useful travel distance. A counterweight beginning high in the gallery could continue downward beyond its lower end, increasing the length over which gravity acts. Yet this creates complications at the junctions. The passage is narrow, and the lower granite plugs occupy part of the route in the finished pyramid. The timing of their installation becomes crucial. If the passage served as a counterweight track, the plugs could not be fixed in their final blocking position until the mechanism was no longer needed. This sequence is possible. The granite blocks may have weighted higher in the system or elsewhere before being moved into place during final sealing. But the exact procedure is uncertain, and every proposed order must account for how workers entered and exited after the passage was closed. The upper turning mechanism is even more difficult to reconstruct. A rope coming up the gallery must change direction without cutting deeply into its support. A stationary wooden beam would experience intense abrasion. A rotating roller would reduce friction but require strong bearings and careful alignment. Several smaller rollers could distribute the load, though they would increase the complexity of the installation. There is no surviving wheel, axle, or timber frame. The term pulley-like therefore matters. It acknowledges that the builders may have redirected force without possessing the exact mechanical device imagined by later engineers. A smooth beam, a curved wooden saddle, or a rope passing around a fixed cylindrical support can produce a similar effect while remaining technologically plausible for the Old Kingdom. Experimental archaeology could test such arrangements, but scaling remains a problem. A model using hundreds of kilograms may behave differently from one handling tens of tons. Rope stretches, timber compresses, stone surfaces chip, friction changes as dust and heat accumulate. A system that works once under controlled conditions may fail after repeated use. The pyramid itself offers no obvious pile of discarded counterweights or broken mechanical parts. If rubble served as ballast, it could easily have been reused in the core. Timber would be too valuable to abandon. Ropes could be repaired or repurposed. The removal of the machine may have been so complete that only the architectural supports remained. This absence is both reasonable and dangerous. It can explain why no equipment survives, but it also makes the theory difficult to falsify. Almost any missing component can be assigned to vanished wood or rope. A convincing model therefore must depend on more than the statement that perishable materials disappeared. It must show that the surviving geometry strongly favours one arrangement over its competitors. At present, it does not do so conclusively. The counterweight theory explains the gallery's slope, height, continuity, and mechanical-looking details better than many older proposals. It also offers a coherent relationship between the gallery and the antechamber, but it still requires assumptions about rope paths, timber strength, reset cycles, construction timing, and the location of the loads being lifted. No single explanation fully accounts for all of these problems. The machine may have existed in a form broadly similar to the reconstruction, in a much simpler form, or not at all. The gallery could have supported temporary lifting equipment without functioning as one unified counterweight system. Several operations may have used the same space at different stages. The most compelling aspect of the theory is not that it finally solves the Great Pyramid, it is that it restores motion to a corridor usually seen only in silence. For a time, the Grand Gallery may have contained sliding weight, taut rope, flexing timber, shouted coordination, dust, heat, and the measured release of gravity. The empty incline would then be the fossil of a machine. But fossils preserve bodies imperfectly. Here, only the stone framework remains, while every moving part has vanished. If the Grand Gallery was once the framework of a machine, the strongest surviving witnesses are not the walls themselves, but the repeated gaps cut into them. Along both sides of the gallery, the raised benches are interrupted by a sequence of sockets placed at regular intervals. Above and beside them, recesses and grooves follow the same long-rising order. Their symmetry is difficult to ignore. One side answers the other. One opening corresponds to its partner across the central trench. The pattern continues upward with the disciplined repetition of a designed installation. Something was expected to occupy these spaces. That conclusion is easier to reach than the next one. The sockets do not identify what they held. A rectangular hole can receive a post, a brace, a beam end, a locking block, a removable barrier, or part of a frame. Its shape records contact with an absent object, but not the purpose of that object. The Grand Gallery therefore preserves attachment points without preserving the attachment. The most common mechanical reconstruction places wooden uprights in the sockets. These posts rise beside the central channel and connect to beams running along or across the gallery. Longitudinal members may fit into the wall grooves, creating a rigid framework extending up the slope. Crossbeams could span the passage at regular intervals, holding guide rails, rope supports, brakes, or a temporary floor. The attraction of this idea lies in the numbers. Repetition implies that a single isolated support was not enough. Whatever occupied the sockets seems to have formed a system. A line of frames would distribute force over many points rather than concentrating it in one place. If ropes were under heavy tension, several supports could share the load. If a sled moved through the gallery, repeated guides could keep it aligned. If a platform covered the central trench, the sockets might anchor the structure that carried it. Yet the geometry is not perfectly uniform. Some sockets differ in depth or condition. Several appear damaged or enlarged. Edges have been lost. Later intruders may have cut into them, and centuries of traffic have altered nearby surfaces. This makes it difficult to determine which irregularities are original. Ancient builders working in stone rarely produce mathematical perfection, but the distinction between intended variation and later damage can change an entire reconstruction. A mechanical theory may depend on a post fitting tightly at a particular angle. If the socket's present shape is not original, that fit becomes uncertain. A recess interpreted as a bearing surface may actually be a broken edge. Conversely, a feature dismissed as damage may preserve the only surviving trace of an attachment. This is why detailed measurement matters. The sockets must be studied not as a decorative pattern, but as a three-dimensional network. Their depths, orientations, spacing, wear, and relationship to joints in the surrounding masonry all affect what could have stood there. A beam resting in a socket behaves differently from a post wedged against a wall. A support carrying vertical weight leaves different stresses from one resisting sideways pull. The side benches also complicate the picture. Their upper surfaces are narrow, and any wooden framework rising from them would reduce the available space further. Workers operating such a system would need platforms or access routes that are no longer present. A temporary wooden deck over the central trench could solve this problem, creating a broad working surface while leaving room beneath for a moving sled or rope system. This arrangement would transform the gallery completely. What appears today as an open vertical hall might once have been divided into levels. The lower zone could contain a track or moving weight. The upper zone could carry workers, guide ropes, or allow access to the framework. The monumental height would no longer be empty spectacle. It would be clearance, but this remains an inference built from absence. No surviving timber bears marks matching the sockets. No wooden fragment has been securely identified as part of the gallery's internal equipment. No ancient illustration shows a comparable installation inside a pyramid. The evidence allows a framework, but it does not require one. An alternative view connects the sockets to the granite plugs. According to the traditional ceiling interpretation, large granite blocks were stored in the Grand Gallery before being released down the ascending passage. Wooden beams placed across the corridor might have restrained them. The repeated openings could have supported crossbars acting as stops, allowing the blocks to be held at intervals until the burial was complete. The model has a certain practical logic. A heavy block on a slope must be prevented from sliding. Repeated barriers provide security. Once workers are ready to seal the passage, they remove the lower restraint, allow one block to descend, then repeat the process. The difficulty is scale. Only a small number of granite plugs survive in the ascending passage, while the gallery contains far more socket pairs than would seem necessary to hold them. A theory can propose that many beams were used to restrain only a few blocks, creating multiple layers of safety. But this begins to feel inefficient. The positions of the sockets and the shape of the central trench also do not produce an obvious storage arrangement without additional wooden flooring and guides. Controlling the descent would be hazardous. A granite block weighing several tons could not simply be released and trusted to stop in the correct place. It might jam, fracture, or gain destructive speed. Workers would need ropes, wedges, lubricated surfaces, and access around the moving stone. Once the first block descended, the passage behind it would become increasingly difficult to reach. The sockets could have helped, but they do not explain the full sequence. A ceremonial interpretation offers another possibility. Repeated wooden elements may have supported lamps, curtains, panels, or ritual barriers. The gallery could have been transformed during the royal funeral, its side structures carrying temporary decorations or symbolic objects. The measured intervals might reflect ceremonial order rather than mechanical necessity. This idea fits the monument's religious context, but physical evidence is slight. The sockets appear robust and closely connected to the gallery's unusual floor design. Their form seems more suited to structural fittings than light ornament. Still, ancient Egyptian ritual equipment could be substantial, and the boundary between sacred display and practical support is not always clear. The grooves along the walls present a related puzzle. If they held continuous beams, those beams would have linked the separate sockets into a coherent structure. If they guided sliding components, they might preserve evidence of movement. If they were construction channels, they could have helped align masonry or support scaffolding while the corbelled walls rose. Some grooves may also have been altered after the gallery's primary use ended. A temporary installation might be dismantled, and its attachment points modified during final finishing. Later intruders could cut into them while searching for hidden spaces. The visible form may therefore combine several phases of activity. The complete disappearance of wooden equipment is not surprising. Egypt's dry climate can preserve wood under favourable conditions, but the Grand Gallery has been open to air, visitors, smoke, moisture changes, and repeated intrusion for many centuries. Valuable timber would not necessarily be abandoned. Large beams could be reused in temples, workshops, boats, scaffolds, or other construction. Even damaged pieces could be burned as fuel. Rope would vanish more easily, plant fibers decay, fray, or become useful elsewhere. Leather fittings and wooden pins would be equally vulnerable. Metal components, if any existed, would be rare and valuable enough to remove. The absence of equipment therefore does not disprove a machine, it simply prevents direct confirmation. This is the central tension of the sockets. They are too regular to ignore and too empty to interpret securely. They make the gallery look unfinished, as though its essential components have been stripped away. Yet they could belong to construction, sealing, ritual, maintenance, or several uses in sequence. A lesser-known possibility is that the sockets were intentionally designed for adaptability. Rather than holding one permanent apparatus, they may have allowed workers to install different wooden systems as the project changed. Frames could support scaffolding during construction, then restrain blocks during sealing, then be removed before the final closure. The same attachment points might serve several temporary purposes without leaving distinct traces for each. Such reuse would fit the practical intelligence of a long construction project. Cutting sockets into stone requires effort, but once created, they provide reliable anchors for many tasks. Their spacing may reflect the reach of workers, the length of available timber, or the need to divide the gallery into manageable stages. The stone remembers the intervals. It does not remember the sequence. Each empty opening marks the place where architecture once met something perishable. Across 45 centuries, The durable half of that connection survives while the functional half disappears. The gallery still contains the shape of its missing equipment, but only as negative space. And because those spaces can support several reconstructions, they deepen rather than resolve the mystery. The empty sockets encourage the mind to rebuild a machine. But the Grand Gallery belongs to a monument in which movement through stone was never merely practical. Every passage approaches the king's death, and every change in height, direction, darkness, and material could carry meaning beyond its immediate engineering role. The gallery rises toward the king's chamber with a steadiness that feels intentional. A person entering from below leaves the cramped ascending passage and steps into an unexpectedly vast space, yet continues along the same upward angle. The route does not wander, it climbs. The walls draw inward above, turning the corridor into a narrowing stone canopy, while the upper end remains hidden until the ascent is nearly complete. Even without decoration, the architecture controls the body and the imagination. In a royal funerary setting, ascent is rarely neutral. Egyptian kingship connects death with transformation rather than simple disappearance. The dead ruler is expected to join divine powers, accompany the sun, enter the company of the gods, and endure among the stars that never seem to set. These ideas are known most clearly from later royal funerary texts, especially the pyramid texts inscribed inside pyramids beginning generations after Khufu. The Great Pyramid itself contains no such inscriptions. Any attempt to apply later wording directly to its passages must therefore remain cautious. Still, the religious world reflected in those later texts did not appear suddenly from nothing. Concepts of royal ascent, rebirth, celestial permanence, and solar renewal were already developing during the Old Kingdom. Khufu's pyramid stands within that tradition, even if the precise symbolism of its interior remains unstated. The gallery's incline may have evoked upward passage in a literal and sacred sense. The king's body would not necessarily have been carried through it in the same way modern visitors climb it, and the exact route of the funeral is uncertain. Yet the architecture links lower regions of the pyramid with the chamber intended for royal burial. It creates a controlled approach in which ascent becomes increasingly monumental before contracting again near the final chamber. This alternation may be significant. The narrow ascending passage imposes confinement. The gallery releases that confinement vertically, producing awe without offering freedom of movement. At its summit, the route compresses again through the low passage and the antechamber. The sequence resembles a series of thresholds rather than a straightforward hallway. A threshold changes status. On one side lies ordinary access, on the other lies protected and sacred space. The Grand Gallery may have marked the longest and most dramatic stage in that transformation. Its height separates it from service passages, while its regular geometry creates a sense of order appropriate to royal ritual. The climber moves beneath ascending layers of stone toward a chamber lined not with local limestone, but with granite brought from the distant south. The lack of wall reliefs or inscriptions does not automatically weaken a ceremonial interpretation. Early pyramid interiors are generally austere. Meaning can reside in orientation, material, proportion, and sequence rather than painted imagery. The polished surfaces, controlled darkness, and changing spatial experience may have been sufficient to distinguish the route. Light would have altered it profoundly. During construction, daylight may have entered from above. During final ritual use, however, the gallery would have depended on portable lamps or torches. Small flames placed along the side benches could create a rising chain of illumination. Their reflections would travel across smooth limestone. The corbelled courses would appear and disappear as light shifted. while the upper roof remained in shadow. If the sockets once held supports for lamps or ceremonial fixtures, the space could have been transformed temporarily without leaving obvious remains. There is no direct evidence for such an arrangement, and it should not be described as fact. Yet the architecture is capable of theatrical control. It magnifies sound, height, and movement, while withholding a clear view of the destination. That capacity may have mattered even if the gallery's first purpose was mechanical. The central trench also lends itself to symbolic readings. A narrow rising path between raised side structures could separate the royal route from those attending it. Priests or workers might occupy the benches while a coffin, shrine, or ritual object moved along the centre. Wooden flooring may once have changed the effective width, but the permanent stone still defines a strongly axial path. Some interpretations connect the gallery with celestial symbolism. The pyramid's northern shafts and orientation toward the circumpolar region have long encouraged associations with the imperishable stars. The king's ascent through the monument may have mirrored his journey into a realm of eternal order. Other interpretations emphasize the sun, whose daily rising and setting offered the most powerful visible model of death and renewal. The evidence does not allow the gallery to be assigned confidently to one celestial system. The internal passages do not align straightforwardly with a single star or solar event in a way that settles their meaning. Stellar positions also change slowly over time, and proposed alignments depend on dates, construction tolerances, and assumptions about intended targets. Scholars still debate how literal such orientations were. What can be said is that the pyramid joins geometry with cosmology. Its cardinal alignment, towering shape, temples, causeway, and burial architecture place the king within an ordered landscape. The Grand Gallery participates in that order through its exact slope and uncompromising direction toward the chamber above. The corbelled walls may themselves have carried symbolic force. As they rise, each course advances inward, creating a layered vault unlike the flat ceilings below. To a modern observer, the form can resemble a ladder, a narrowing mountain cleft, or a stone version of ascending steps. These impressions are powerful, but they are modern associations unless supported by contemporary evidence. No surviving Old Kingdom text identifies the gallery's 7 corbelled courses as a symbolic ladder or celestial diagram. The number and spacing of its architectural features have also attracted elaborate numerical interpretations. Some writers find encoded measurements, astronomical cycles, or sacred proportions in the sockets and dimensions. Certain patterns may be intentional, because builders necessarily worked with modules and repeated intervals. Yet numerical coincidence is easy to manufacture when a structure contains many measurements and several possible units. Claims of hidden codes require stronger evidence than suggestive arithmetic. A grounded ceremonial interpretation does not need secret mathematics. It requires only the recognition that royal architecture was designed to shape ritual action and express sacred hierarchy. The gallery's scale, direction, and position make such a role plausible. The harder question is whether symbolism can explain its technical details. Why would a ceremonial route require dozens of sockets? Why cut long grooves into the walls? Why preserve a deep central channel and narrow benches rather than create a broad processional floor? Ritual equipment could account for some features, but the density of attachment points suggests substantial installations. The architecture seems prepared to hold weight, resist force, or support structures more demanding than curtains and lamps. This is where a single-purpose interpretation begins to fail. A space can be sacred without being impractical. The Egyptians did not separate engineering from religion in the modern way. A mechanism used to build the king's eternal monument could later become part of the sacred route to his chamber. The physical ascent of stone and the symbolic ascent of the ruler might occupy the same architecture at different times. Such reuse would not be accidental. Once machinery was removed, the gallery's height and incline would remain. Features originally cut for beams might support ritual furnishings or simply be left visible. The corridor could be cleaned, refined, and incorporated into the funerary sequence. Its construction history would become part of its final monumental presence, even if no later visitor knew exactly what had once filled it. The gallery may therefore have acquired meaning through transformation. During building, it served labour, gravity, and stone. During burial, it served separation, ascent, and royal passage. After sealing, it served no living movement at all, existing in darkness as a permanent route toward a chamber that was never meant to be reopened. No inscription confirms this layered history. No surviving ritual manual describes a ceremony within the gallery. What survives in the record suggests only that the space was both highly functional in form and profoundly monumental in effect. The ascent ends beneath a lowering ceiling. Grandeur contracts into control. Beyond lies not open heaven, but a barrier system of granite, grooves, and narrow passages. Whatever sacred journey the gallery expressed, it also led directly into the pyramid's architecture of exclusion. Exclusion is where the Grand Gallery's ceremonial grandeur meets the pyramid's most practical fear intrusion. The builders know that the royal chamber cannot remain accessible after the funeral. The burial must be completed, the chamber closed, and the route behind it transformed from passage into barrier. Granite is chosen for this work because it is harder and more resistant than the surrounding limestone. In the ascending passage, surviving granite plugs still block the direct route from below. Near the king's chamber, the antechamber contains grooves, channels, and stone elements that appear to belong to another system of closure. The Grand Gallery stands between these two defensive zones. This position has encouraged the traditional idea that the gallery served as a storage and deployment space for blocking stones. Granite plugs could be held on its slope during construction and burial, then released downward into the ascending passage after the king's chamber was sealed. The gallery's incline would guide them. Wooden beams placed across the corridor might restrain the blocks until the correct moment. The repeated sockets along the side benches could support those beams. At first, the theory seems almost self-evident. The plugs survive below, the slope points toward them, the gallery contains attachment points. A long inclined chamber could act as a waiting area for stones destined to descend, but the operation becomes more difficult when imagined in motion. A granite block on a steep polished surface is not a door sliding neatly into place. It is a mass of several tons capable of accelerating, twisting, jamming, or shattering surrounding limestone. Workers would need to lower it with ropes, guide it between narrow walls, and control its speed over the entire descent. The ascending passage offers little room to stand beside the moving stone. Once the first plug enters the passage, access becomes increasingly restricted. The builders could use wooden chocks and crossbeams to divide the descent into stages. Ropes might pass around anchors above. Sand, gypsum, or other materials could alter friction. The plugs may have rested on wooden sledges or temporary runners rather than directly on stone. Yet every added element increases the complexity of a sequence for which no written instructions survive. The number of sockets also creates doubt. The Grand Gallery contains many more paired openings than seem necessary to restrain the few plugs still visible in the ascending passage. A defender of the storage theory can argue that repeated beams provided redundant safety, or that additional blocking stones once existed and were later removed. Neither possibility is impossible. Neither is demonstrated by the surviving evidence. There is also a dimensional problem. The gallery's central channel and benches do not form an obvious storage bed for a row of granite blocks without substantial wooden construction. The plugs would need stable support and enough clearance for workers to manipulate ropes and wedges around them. A temporary floor may solve this, but it is another vanished component reconstructed from necessity. The traditional theory may therefore describe part of the truth rather than the whole. The gallery could have supported a sealing operation without being designed primarily as a plug warehouse. Its sockets may have anchored equipment used to control the stones rather than hold each block in a fixed position for years. The same framework that once assisted construction could later be adapted for closure. The antechamber presents a related but distinct security problem. It lies between the top of the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber, a narrow space containing vertical grooves cut into its walls and granite elements associated with portcullis-like barriers. In theory, slabs could be lowered into these grooves after the burial, creating multiple obstacles before the chamber. The surviving arrangement is incomplete and damaged. Some granite has been removed, passageways have been broken through. The exact sequence in which barriers descended remains debated. Yet the architecture clearly anticipates controlled movement of heavy stone within a confined area. This makes the upper end of the Grand Gallery strategically important. Workers standing there could operate ropes connected to the antechamber barriers. The Great Step provides a raised position from which tension might be managed. Grooves and openings could guide lines toward the granite slabs. Once the chamber was sealed, the equipment could be removed or abandoned. A single gallery installation may therefore have served two final tasks: lowering plugs into the ascending passage and controlling barriers near the King's Chamber. The geometry places it between both systems, and its height would allow ropes to run above workers and obstacles. Such a role does not require the gallery to be a full lifting machine during construction, though it would still make its mechanical-looking features functional. The security interpretation also changes how the gallery's emptiness is understood. After the final sealing, the corridor may have been intentionally stripped. Timber, ropes, braces, and tools would no longer be needed. Workers would withdraw through a route that remained open only temporarily, perhaps using the well shaft connection to bypass sections being closed. This escape sequence is one of the most persistent puzzles of the interior. If the ascending passage was sealed by granite plugs and the antechamber barriers were lowered, how did the last workers leave the irregular shaft descending from near the lower end of the gallery toward the subterranean system may have provided a route? It is partly cut through masonry and bedrock, with rough sections unlike the carefully finished principal passages. Its shape suggests practical access rather than royal ceremony. Workers could descend through this shaft after releasing the plugs, eventually reaching the lower passages and leaving through the main entrance. The upper opening might then be concealed or closed. This reconstruction is plausible, but the shaft's chronology and exact original condition remain uncertain. Later intruders altered parts of the system, making it difficult to separate planned escape route from subsequent tunneling and repair. Even a perfectly executed closure would not guarantee security. Tomb protection depends on secrecy as much as stone. Anyone familiar with the internal plan could bypass barriers by cutting through adjacent limestone, exactly as ancient intruders eventually did around the granite plugs. The pyramid's enormous mass discourages random excavation, but it cannot defeat informed access indefinitely. This explains why the sealing system may appear both ingenious and inadequate. It was not designed to resist modern drilling or centuries of determined tunneling. It was intended to make the route difficult, hidden, and dangerous within the technological and social conditions of its time. The barriers delay intrusion. They do not make it impossible. The Grand Gallery's monumental height seems excessive if its only task was to manage a few blocking stones. A lower chamber with secure anchor points might have sufficed. This is one of the strongest objections to a purely defensive interpretation. Security explains the gallery's position and some of its features, but not its full scale. Its grandeur may have served ritual before closure. Its sockets may have supported construction equipment long before burial. Its slope may have assisted both hauling and sealing. The final defensive use could be only the last phase in a longer architectural life. A lesser-known possibility is that some security features were never used exactly as intended. Large projects sometimes preserve contingency systems. A set of grooves may be prepared for barriers that were altered, partially installed, or deployed differently during the final ceremony. The absence of a complete mechanism may reflect not only later damage, but changes made before the pyramid was sealed. The evidence remains incomplete, and certainty becomes especially difficult when studying systems designed to disappear. Successful sealing removes the workers, tools, and operating sequence from view. Later robbery destroys the arrangement further. What survives is the aftermath of both closure and breach. The Grand Gallery stands between them. It may once have been crowded with the final activity of the pyramid's interior ropes tightening, beams being removed, granite beginning to move, and workers retreating from spaces that would soon belong only to the dead king. Then the last route closed, and the soaring corridor fell silent. For the first time in its existence, the gallery had no practical task left to perform. Its machine, ritual, and security functions, whatever their exact order, ended in darkness. Darkness changes the gallery more completely than any drawing can show. Modern photographs flatten the space with electric light. They reveal joints, sockets, stone benches, and the narrowing roof all at once. The eye can inspect the corridor as an object, but during its active life, the gallery would rarely have appeared in that complete form. Light would arrive in fragments. A flame carried upward would illuminate a few meters of wall, then leave the rest suspended beyond sight. The height of the ceiling would be sensed before it was seen. This partial visibility affects how the architecture is experienced. The lower walls emerge first, close enough to touch. Above them, the corbelled courses step inward through bands of shadow. Their repetition exaggerates the sense of height, because each layer briefly catches light before disappearing again. The roof does not simply cover the passage, it seems to withdraw from the people below. A small oil lamp produces little illumination in a space of this scale. Several lamps placed along the side benches could mark the incline without fully revealing it. Flames might create a line of light rising toward the king's chamber, each one reflected faintly from dressed limestone. If smoke accumulated near the roof, the upper gallery could become even less visible, dissolving into a dark canopy above the root. Torches would provide stronger light but create more heat, smoke, and soot. Their flames would move constantly, shifting the apparent position of joints and recesses. Stone surfaces would seem to expand and contract as shadows crossed them. A wooden framework, if one still stood during construction or ritual use, would divide the light further, casting a grid of beams across the walls. No surviving evidence allows the exact lighting arrangement to be reconstructed. Scholars still debate whether lamps, torches, open daylight, or combinations of these dominated at different stages. During construction, the gallery may have remained open above for part of its life. Later, once roofed and enclosed, artificial light became essential. The same space could therefore change from a sunlit work trench into a dim internal ascent. The human body would register that transformation immediately. Climbing the slope requires constant adjustment. The angle is not extreme enough to demand crawling, but it is steep enough to prevent effortless walking. The central route is constrained by the raised benches. Depending on temporary flooring, workers may have moved on planks, ramps, or ladders that no longer survive. In the finished gallery, footing remains deliberate. The body leans forward while ascending and braces against gravity while descending. This physical effort gives the passage an emotional rhythm. The climb is long enough to become tiring, but not long enough to lose sight of its destination entirely. The top seems near, then recedes as the incline continues. The great step interrupts the movement only at the end, forcing a final change in posture before the low passage ahead. In ceremonial use, effort may have been part of the design. Sacred architecture often controls speed. Narrow passages slow groups. Steps separate ranks. Low openings require the body to bow. The grand gallery could impose an upward progression in which movement becomes increasingly focused. Even without decoration, its geometry would produce discipline. Construction work would create a very different experience. Men carrying tools, repositioning timbers, handling rope, and guiding loads would occupy a noisy, dangerous environment. The side benches might serve as working ledges. Temporary platforms could span the central trench. Dust from stone dressing would hang in the air. Fibers from strained ropes would fray. Wooden beams would creak under load. Sound would travel unusually through the high, narrow space. A voice spoken near the lower end might rise along the corridor and return from the stone above. Sharp sounds would echo differently from low, continuous ones. The scrape of a sled, the strike of a mallet, or the release of a wooden brace could reverberate far beyond its source. In a mechanical system, this acoustic behavior might even carry useful information. Workers could hear changes in rope tension, timber strain, or stone movement before they could see the cause. This possibility should not be romanticized into a sophisticated acoustic technology without evidence. Yet builders who spent years inside stone structures would understand sound practically. A crack, shift, or hollow response can warn that material is behaving differently. Modern conservators still use tapping and acoustic methods to detect changes in stone. Ancient workers may have relied on trained hearing in simpler ways. In ritual use, the same acoustics could amplify voices or chants. A small group near the center of the gallery might produce a sound much larger than itself. The corbelled roof would scatter reflections rather than return one clean echo. Words could blur while rhythm and tone remained. The effect might feel less like speech and more like the monument itself responding. No text confirms that chants occurred here, and no acoustic study can prove an ancient intention merely by showing that the gallery resonates. Every enclosed stone space has acoustic properties. The important point is that the builders created an environment in which sound was impossible to ignore. Smell would contribute another layer now absent from plans and reconstructions. Burning oil, smoke, sweat, limestone dust, timber, rope fibre, and perhaps resins used in funerary preparation would fill the confined air. Ventilation through narrow shafts and passages would be limited and variable. The gallery's height might allow smoke to rise away from people below, making the space more usable than a lower corridor, but the upper roof could still trap deposits. Modern visitors encounter a monument altered by open access, ventilation systems, restoration, and centuries of intrusion. The original atmosphere cannot be recreated simply by turning off electric lights. The air itself was different. Temperature may also have been more stable than outside. Deep within the pyramid, the stone moderates daily extremes. Construction activity, lamps, and groups of people would warm the corridor locally, but the surrounding mass would absorb heat. The result could be a cool space punctuated by warm zones around light and labour. These sensory details matter because function is partly revealed through usability. A theory that places many workers in the gallery must allow them to breathe, move, communicate, and escape danger. A theory involving ritual procession must account for the narrow route and uncertain visibility. A theory involving heavy machinery must explain where operators stood and how they monitored motion. The gallery's great height may solve some of these problems. It provides room for smoke to rise, sound to travel, ropes to clear workers, and timber frameworks to occupy several vertical levels. What appears excessive for a corridor may be practical for a crowded temporary installation. At the same time, height magnifies psychological effect. The builders could not have been unaware of how the space felt once enclosed. Even if its dimensions were dictated initially by engineering, the completed gallery would possess a grandeur difficult to ignore. Practical form and emotional power may have emerged from the same design. A lesser-known contradiction lies in the absence of ornament. Monumental Egyptian spaces often communicate status through relief, colour, inscriptions, or carefully staged images. The Grand Gallery relies almost entirely on proportion and stone. This austerity could indicate a technical origin. It could also reflect an early period in which royal interior symbolism remained architectural rather than textual. The silence of the walls therefore does not make the experience empty. Their meaning may have been carried by movement, light, material, and restricted access rather than written language. Imagine the gallery after the final workers withdraw. Lamps disappear one by one down the slope. The upper walls fade first. The benches and sockets vanish next. The last light contracts around the lower opening, then is gone. The architecture remains unchanged, but its human world disappears instantly. For thousands of years, the space preserves no sound, no movement, and almost no light. When intruders eventually return, they enter not the living gallery of Khufu's builders, but its abandoned shell. The abandoned shell is no longer entirely beyond reach. Modern investigators can now search through the pyramid without cutting a new tunnel, yet the discoveries emerging from these searches have made the Grand Gallery less, not more straightforward. The most important clue lies above it. In 2017, researchers using cosmic ray muons detected a substantial low-density region inside the Great Pyramid. Muons are produced when cosmic rays strike the upper atmosphere. They pass through stone more readily than many other particles, but dense material absorbs or deflects some of them. By placing detectors inside and around a structure, researchers can compare the number of muons arriving from different directions. An unexpected excess may indicate that the particles have crossed less stone than predicted, suggesting a cavity or zone of reduced density. 3 independent detection systems observe the same anomaly above the Grand Gallery. The result is difficult to dismiss as an instrumental accident. A large void exists there, extending for at least about 30 meters. Almost everything beyond that statement remains uncertain. The detectors do not see an interior space as a camera would. They produce directional measurements that must be reconstructed into probable shapes. The void may be a long chamber, an inclined corridor, several connected cavities, or a region of loosely arranged masonry. Its exact height, width, orientation, and internal divisions are not yet known with sufficient precision. No known passage enters it, and no instrument has shown what lies on its surfaces. Its position immediately encourages comparison with the Grand Gallery. The two spaces may run roughly parallel. If so, the hidden void could be another gallery-like feature above the visible one. It might help redistribute weight, provide construction access, or form part of a larger internal system. Yet even the phrase above the gallery can be misleading. The pyramid is three-dimensional, and a void detected in the same general region need not align perfectly with the corridor below. The discovery complicates structural explanations first. If the Grand Gallery's corbelled roof was designed to carry a solid mass of masonry, then a large empty space overhead changes the load environment. The hidden void may reduce direct pressure above part of the gallery. It may redirect weight toward the sides. It may form the true relieving element, with the visible corbelled architecture supporting only the lower boundary of a broader system. But calling it a relieving space remains an interpretation. A cavity can reduce weight without having been created solely for that reason. It may survive from a construction method that left open channels within the core. It might have served as a temporary route for moving materials or workers. It could even have begun as a functional space and later contributed incidentally to load distribution. Mechanical theories face similar uncertainty. If the Grand Gallery once housed a lifting system, the void above might provide room for ropes, access, or equipment connected to that mechanism. Perhaps the visible gallery was one level of a more complex installation. Perhaps the hidden space allowed workers to reach upper construction zones while machinery operated below. This possibility is intriguing, but there is no evidence yet of a physical connection. A void separated from the gallery by several meters of stone could have little direct mechanical relationship to it. Without a precise map, the temptation to unite the two spaces into one machine runs ahead of the data. Ceremonial interpretations are also affected. A large concealed space in the same region raises the possibility that the interior plan included more than the known route to the king's chamber, yet no entrance, decoration, or ritual object has been detected. The void may never have been intended for human occupation after construction. Its existence alone does not make it a secret chamber in the popular sense. The cautious language of detection is often lost when the discovery reaches a wider audience. A low-density anomaly becomes a room becomes a hidden chamber becomes the king's true burial place, an archive, or a repository of lost knowledge. None of these claims follows from the measurements. The pyramid has already demonstrated why restraint is necessary. A second hidden feature, the north face corridor, was first identified through non-destructive scanning behind the monument's northern face. Later investigations using higher resolution muon detectors, radar, ultrasound, electrical resistivity, and image fusion refined its position and shape. Eventually, researchers could describe it as a corridor-like structure with much greater confidence. This sequence offers a model for studying the Big Void. One method reveals an anomaly. Other techniques test it from different physical perspectives. Mography measures density along long paths. Radar responds to changes in material boundaries. Ultrasound can identify reflections and internal interfaces. Electrical resistivity distinguishes regions that conduct current differently. None provides a complete answer alone. The north face corridor also shows how slowly a hidden space becomes archaeologically meaningful. Confirming that a corridor exists is not the same as understanding why it was built. Its gabled roof and location may suggest a structural or construction role, but its original function remains debated. Discovery is only the first stage of interpretation. The Big Void is far harder to study because it lies deeper inside the pyramid. Radar and ultrasound lose effectiveness over long distances through irregular masonry. Electrical methods are influenced by joints, moisture, and changing stone conditions. access points are limited. Any drilling proposal must balance scientific value against the risk of damaging one of the world's most important monuments. More sensitive muon tomography may eventually improve the three-dimensional image. Larger detectors placed at multiple positions could narrow the range of possible shapes. Even then, muons would reveal geometry more readily than purpose. A long cavity might be mapped precisely while its use remained unknown. New investigations of the visible chambers help indirectly. Ultrasonic testing of granite blocks in the King's Chamber can identify thickness, joints, and reflecting surfaces hidden within the construction. Material analysis can distinguish stone composition, deposits, and later, alteration. Studies of vibration and structural response can show how the pyramid behaves as a whole under environmental forces. These findings do not explain the Grand Gallery directly. Their value lies in reducing uncertainty around its surroundings. A feature once interpreted as solid masonry may contain a joint or hidden surface. A mark thought to result from ancient machinery may prove to be mineral deposition. A crack assumed to reflect original stress may belong to a later event. The more precisely the pyramid is examined, the less useful it becomes to treat its interior as a clean geometric diagram. The core is built from individual stones of varying size and quality. Gaps may exist between blocks. Mortar fills some joints but not others. Construction zones may differ in density. An apparent void in low-resolution data could represent a formal chamber, a rough cavity, or a region where masonry was laid less compactly. This complexity may explain why hidden spaces exist at all. Building a monument of this size requires temporary access routes, staging areas, and changing work fronts. Some cavities could be intentional but never meant to survive as part of the final architecture. Others may have been left open because filling them offered no structural advantage. The finished pyramid could contain traces of its own construction process in places no one expected to revisit. The Grand Gallery may be one such trace transformed into permanent architecture. The Big Void may be another trace left inaccessible. Their proximity could reflect shared construction logic even if they never connected. A lesser-known possibility is that the hidden region consists not of one elegant space, but of several smaller gaps that produce a combined muon signal. Popular reconstructions often draw a single clean chamber, because the image is easy to understand. The actual interior may be irregular, stepped, or divided by masonry too thin for current detectors to resolve. This uncertainty matters because different shapes imply different functions. A broad horizontal cavity may relieve pressure, a narrow inclined passage may serve movement, a sequence of separated voids may result from construction staging. Until shape is known, purpose remains even further away. The Great Pyramid is therefore becoming more visible without becoming fully legible. Instruments reveal that the known chambers are not the complete interior story. They expose hidden architecture while removing the comfort of older models built around a few simple rooms. The Grand Gallery no longer stands alone beneath an assumed solid mass. It belongs to a region containing at least one major unseen void and perhaps other structural irregularities still beyond resolution. Every theory must now account not only for the corridor's visible design, but for an invisible neighborhood whose plan has barely begun to emerge. The stone mountain is not empty. It is not entirely solid either. Between those two facts lies a hidden architecture that may preserve the final clues or deepen the mystery beyond anything the visible gallery could reveal. The hidden architecture above the gallery has not ended the debate. It has multiplied the number of things every explanation must now account for. The mechanical interpretation remains among the most compelling because it treats the gallery as a working system rather than an oversized passage. the slope, height, central trench, side benches, sockets, grooves, and upper connection to the antechamber can all be arranged into a coherent picture of frames, ropes, sledges, guides, and counterweights. Unlike theories that explain only one feature, it tries to give the entire space a job. Its weakness is that the machine exists mainly in reconstruction. No pulley wheel, rope bundle, wooden frame, or identifiable counterweight has been found. The stone does not preserve an uncontested pattern of wear proving repeated hauling. The route is too narrow for the largest granite beams, so any system must operate indirectly or in combination with external ramps. The timing must also be exact. The gallery must be sufficiently complete to support equipment, yet remain connected to an open construction surface where heavy loads can still arrive. None of these objections makes the theory impossible. They simply prevent it from becoming established fact. A model can be mechanically plausible and historically unproven at the same time. The counterweight version faces an additional challenge. Gravity provides useful force, but it does not provide control automatically. The descending mass must be guided, braked, reset, and prevented from damaging the passage. Rope tension must be redirected through support strong enough to survive repeated cycles. Workers need safe positions from which to operate the system. Every solution introduces a missing component made of timber, rope, leather, or smaller stone fittings. The absence of perishable equipment is understandable, yet it creates a methodological danger. A theory becomes difficult to test when every missing piece can be assigned to material that was later removed. The strongest mechanical case would come not merely from showing that a machine could fit, but from demonstrating that the surviving architecture is unlikely to have served any other purpose. That standard has not yet been met. External ramp models reduce the need to turn the gallery into the central lifting engine. A network of ramps integrated along the pyramid's edges or faces could move blocks upward as each construction stage advanced. Such systems benefit from direct access to the growing exterior and avoid forcing large stones through narrow internal passages. Computational studies can test gradients, hauling distances, material requirements, workforce movements, and construction schedules. But external ramps have their own problems. A straight ramp reaching high levels would require an enormous volume of material and could obstruct work on the pyramid face. Zigzag or edge-integrated ramps reduce bulk but create tight turns and limited working space. Spiral routes may interfere with survey control and hide the corners needed to preserve alignment. Most proposed systems leave only uncertain archaeological traces. A ramp model can explain how stone reached elevation, without explaining why the Grand Gallery was built with such unusual internal features. It may therefore be correct about the broad construction strategy, while leaving the gallery's specific purpose unresolved. The granite plug interpretation is attractive because it connects visible blocks with visible architecture. The plugs survive in the ascending passage, and the gallery lies directly above their root. Its sockets could have held crossbeams that restrained the stones before final sealing. Unlike a lost counterweight, the objects involved still exist. Yet the numbers and geometry resist a simple match. There are far more socket pairs than surviving plugs. The gallery's height appears excessive for storage. The narrow central trench does not naturally form a stable bed for several massive blocks without extensive temporary flooring and guidance. Releasing the plugs would require careful control in a passage offering almost no room beside them. The theory may explain the final use of the gallery without explaining its original design. A space built for construction could later become a staging area for sealing. In that case, plug storage is not wrong, but incomplete. The security interpretation expands this idea by treating the gallery as the operational zone between the plugs below and the antechamber barriers above. Ropes and beams could control both systems. The Great Step offers a working position, and the gallery's vertical clearance allows force to be redirected above the heads of operators. This explains location better than scale. A smaller chamber could manage barriers. The gallery's monumental volume and repeated features suggest either a more extensive mechanism or an additional function. Security also cannot explain the big void above unless that hidden space somehow supported the closure system, for which there is currently no evidence. The structural theory begins from what the gallery unquestionably does. It remains standing beneath an immense mass. The corbelled walls reduce the final roof span and direct loads into surrounding masonry. The space may form part of a broader system that includes hidden voids above, relieving pressure around the king's chamber region. This interpretation benefits from physical necessity. Any large cavity inside the pyramid must be structurally managed. The builders clearly use different roofing solutions in different chambers, and the gallery's corbelling is deliberate. But necessity is not purpose. The walls must support the space, whatever the space was for. Structural design can explain how the gallery survives without explaining why it needed to be so tall, so long, so steep, or lined with sockets. The big void may prove structurally important, yet its shape is still too uncertain to show whether it was designed as a relieving chamber, construction gap, or something else. Earthquake resilience adds another layer, but not a final answer. The pyramid's geometry and mass have helped it endure seismic events, and internal spaces influence its dynamic behavior. Still, survival under earthquakes does not demonstrate that the gallery was created specifically for seismic protection. Robust architecture often performs functions its builders did not isolate as separate design goals. The ceremonial interpretation addresses what mechanical and structural theories often neglect: the gallery's effect on human movement and royal meaning. Its ascent, monumental height, darkness, controlled approach, and position before the king's chamber make it suitable for ritual transformation. The corridor can embody movement from lower space toward the protected realm of the king. This reading fits the funerary nature of the pyramid and the broader ideology of royal ascent. It also explains why the gallery remained open after any construction equipment was removed. A purely temporary machine could have been filled or blocked. Preserving the volume suggests that the completed space mattered. Yet symbolic meaning is difficult to prove without inscriptions, images, ritual objects, or a contemporary text describing the route. The gallery's sockets, grooves, and trench still look unusually technical. Calling them symbolic does not explain how they were used. A ceremonial theory can describe the atmosphere of the finished space while ignoring the practical history embedded in its stone. The idea of a purely astronomical design encounters similar limits. Alignments and proportions may carry celestial associations, but proposed star targets and numerical codes often depend on selective measurements. The pyramid is precise, but precision alone does not prove hidden astronomical programming. Any persuasive claim must arise from consistent Old Kingdom evidence, not from patterns discovered after enough numbers are compared. Fringe explanations thrive in the gaps between these incomplete models. The gallery has been described as part of an ancient power plant, a resonant energy device, a hydraulic machine, or evidence of technology far beyond what archaeology supports. Such ideas often begin with real features: the acoustics, the granite, the unexplained voids, the absence of clear instructions, but then leap beyond the evidence. No traces of electrical infrastructure, industrial residues, advanced machinery, or non-Egyptian builders support these claims. The pyramid belongs materially and historically to the Old Kingdom, Its mysteries arise from lost process, not from the absence of an Egyptian context. The most reasonable position is also the least dramatic. Several explanations may be partly correct. The gallery could have served construction first, sealing second, and ritual passage last. Its corbelled walls could preserve structural stability throughout all three phases. Its sockets could support different wooden installations at different times. The big void above could relate to load management or construction access, without sharing the gallery's final funerary role. A multifunctional model explains why no single theory fits perfectly. It also risks becoming too flexible. If every feature can belong to a different phase, the model may absorb contradictions without being testable. Evidence must still identify which use came first, which modifications followed, and which features were reused. That sequence remains hidden. The Grand Gallery resists consensus not because researchers have failed to imagine enough possibilities, but because the surviving evidence supports several of them at once. Its architecture is compatible with machinery, security, structure, and ritual. Each explanation gains strength from some details and loses it at others. The gallery is not a blank mystery. It is an overdetermined one, carrying too many plausible functions in the same stone. The Grand Gallery's refusal to yield a single answer is not a failure of archaeology. It is a measure of how much information a monument can preserve while losing the human knowledge that once made its features obvious. The builders did not create an enigma for a distant age. To them, the meaning of every socket, groove, step, and change in ceiling height was probably practical and familiar. A supervisor could point to a recess and name the timber fitted there. A rope maker knew the required thickness of a line. A stoneworker understood why one surface had to be smooth, while another could remain rough. Priests and officials knew which roots remained active during the burial and which would be closed forever. Nothing required explanation because the knowledge lived in people. When those people disappeared, the gallery remained as a durable shell around a vanished procedure. Stone preserved dimensions but not instructions. It recorded where objects touched the architecture without identifying those objects. It retained the route of movement after the movement itself ended. Archaeology can reconstruct parts of that lost system, but reconstruction is not memory restored. It is an argument built from traces. This distinction becomes more important as technology improves. Muon detectors can reveal hidden low-density regions. Ultrasonic arrays can map internal surfaces inside granite blocks. Material analysis can distinguish deposits from original stone. Vibration studies can show how the pyramid responds to its environment. Computational models can test ramps, labor schedules, friction, and structural loads with a precision unavailable to earlier investigators. These methods narrow the possibilities. They expose theories that cannot fit the monument's dimensions or physical behavior. They can confirm that a void exists, that a joint lies behind a surface, or that a proposed lifting system would require forces beyond plausible materials, but instruments do not detect intention directly. A scan may reveal that the big void is inclined and gallery-like. Such a result would immediately reshape the debate, but it would not automatically determine whether the space served construction, structure, or access. A survey might identify hidden connections to the Grand Gallery. Yet those connections could have changed function over time. Even entry into the void, should that ever occur safely, may produce an empty stone cavity with no inscription and no surviving equipment. The most decisive future evidence would be physical traces tied to a specific operation. Consistent rope abrasion along a reconstructible path would strengthen a lifting theory. Post impressions matching the side sockets could define a timber framework. Residues associated with lubrication or repeated sliding might reveal mechanical use. Sealed construction debris could contain wood, fibre, tools, or markings preserved beyond later intrusion. A hidden inscription would be extraordinary, but it is not the only path toward understanding. Ancient construction often reveals itself through humble details: a wooden fragment, a sequence of tool marks, a line scratched by a surveyor, or a piece of rope left where no one expected it to survive. Even then, consensus may remain difficult. One trace can demonstrate that an activity occurred without proving it was the gallery's primary purpose. Rope marks might result from building the corridor rather than operating a permanent machine. Ritual use could follow construction use without modifying the stone. A structural void could double as an access route. The monument's history may resist reduction because it was never designed around only one function. The multifunctional possibility increasingly appears reasonable, though it remains unconfirmed. During the pyramid's rise, the gallery may have supported platforms, hauling equipment, or a force control system. As the upper chambers neared completion, the same attachment points may have assisted sealing operations. After removable structures were taken away, the surviving volume could become part of the formal route toward Khufu's chamber. The corbelled walls would protect the space through every stage. The immense height could provide mechanical clearance first and ceremonial power later. The slope could guide ropes, stones, workers, and eventually ritual movement. Practical construction and sacred architecture would not compete. They would occupy the same place at different moments. This possibility reflects a larger truth about the Great Pyramid. Modern categories divide engineering, religion, administration, and symbolism into separate fields. Khufu's builders worked in a society where these activities were deeply joined. Moving stone for the king was an economic task, a political obligation, a technical challenge, and an act within a sacred order. A device used to raise royal architecture did not cease to belong to religion, simply because it depended on friction and rope. The gallery's design may therefore seem contradictory only because modern observers expect a room to have one label: machine, corridor, ritual passage, structural cavity, security chamber. Ancient builders may have seen no need to choose. This does not justify treating every theory as equally strong. Claims must still answer to the surviving stone. The pulley-like counterweight model remains an ingenious and unusually comprehensive proposal, but it is not established fact. Edge-integrated ramp models demonstrate that the pyramid could potentially have risen without making the gallery its central lifting engine, but they too depend on assumptions not yet confirmed archaeologically. Traditional plug storage theories connect directly to visible granite blocks, yet struggle with the gallery's scale and numerous sockets. Structural interpretations explain survival, but not every architectural detail. Ceremonial readings fit the monument's purpose while leaving its mechanical features unresolved. The honest account must preserve these differences. Consensus does not require every scholar to agree on every timber beam or rope path. It would require evidence strong enough that one general explanation accounts for the architecture better than its rivals. That threshold has not been reached. The gallery remains a space where plausible models overlap without one becoming unavoidable. This uncertainty should not diminish the builder's achievement. Quite the opposite. They created an interior whose stability can still be examined after more than 4,000 years. They coordinated stone from distant quarries, managed enormous loads, maintained precise geometry, and enclosed an unprecedented rising space inside the largest pyramid of their age. Whatever the gallery did, it worked well enough for the broader project to succeed. Its apparent mystery is partly the result of that success. Temporary systems were removed cleanly. Final barriers concealed routes. The surrounding masonry preserved the void. The monument outlived the society that understood its operation, leaving later observers with a finished solution but no record of the problem it solved. The Great Pyramid is often treated as a challenge thrown across time, as though its builders expected future civilizations to decode it. The reality is quieter. They built for Khufu, for their gods, for their state, and for the continuation of a particular order. They did not owe the future a technical manual. What they left instead is more demanding evidence that must be approached without forcing it to say more than it can. At the lower end of the gallery, the narrow ascending passage still enters beneath the enormous corbelled walls. The side sockets still repeat into the distance. The central channel still climbs toward the great step. Above, an unseen void occupies part of the darkness beyond the ceiling. The architecture remains poised between motion and stillness, as if its missing equipment might return and make every feature intelligible. It never does. The gallery's final lesson may be that knowledge does not always disappear because evidence has been destroyed. Sometimes the evidence survives almost perfectly, while the relationship among its parts is lost. A corridor can endure, a machine can vanish. A ritual can leave no text. A construction sequence can become invisible inside the building it created. The Grand Gallery stands at that boundary. It is one of the best preserved questions from the ancient world, built in limestone, hidden beneath a mountain, and still open after 45 centuries. The climb is over now, and the stone grows quiet again. Far above, daylight moves across the pyramid's weathered faces. Heat settles over the plateau, then fades with evening. Visitors cross the ground where quarries, roads, workshops, and temporary ramps once shaped the horizon. Most traces of that living construction world have been softened by time, buried beneath later activity, or carried away for other buildings. Inside, the Grand Gallery remains almost unchanged in its essential form. It has no moving sled, no taut rope, no timber frame, no line of lamps rising toward the chamber. The people who measured its slope and fitted its stones are known only through fragments, work, gang names, tool marks, settlements, bones, discarded objects, and the monument itself. Their knowledge once passed from voice to voice and hand to hand. It did not need to survive on paper. A task was shown, repeated, corrected, and remembered by those who performed it. Then the project ended. Crews dispersed, generations changed, the living chain broke, while the stone continued holding its shape. That is how much of the human past reaches the present not as a complete story, but as a durable object surrounded by silence. The Grand Gallery invites explanation because it feels so deliberate. Every line suggests intention, yet intention is one of the most fragile things time can erase. A wall survives weather. A purpose survives only while someone remembers it, records it, or leaves enough traces for another mind to reconstruct. Perhaps future instruments will map the void above with extraordinary clarity. Perhaps another hidden route will be found. Perhaps a small surviving mark will finally connect the sockets, grooves, and slope to one recognizable operation. The answer may become narrower, stronger, and more convincing. Or the gallery may continue to support several truths at once, a workplace beneath the rising sun, a framework for controlling weight, a route for sealing the dead, and a final ascent enclosed in darkness. The pyramid does not change while the explanations gather around it. It simply remains. And somewhere inside that immense geometry, The gallery rises through the stone as it has since Khufu's age, empty, precise and silent, preserving the shape of something the world has forgotten.